My name is Jin Seok-ho, and in a city that traded on the edge of a blade, I was the blacksmith everyone agreed was worthless. 32 years old, 12 years at the Forge Guild, and not one piece I'd ever forged had passed the guild's grade. The guild master said it plain, in front of the whole row. "Worthless," Master Odron said, and he didn't even raise his voice. 12 years, Seok-ho. 12 years, and every blade you hammered out snapped or dulled inside a season. The guild cannot afford your kind of stubbornness. He slid my mark stamp across the counter like a man wiping off a stain. I wanted to argue. I'd poured myself into the work. The low-grade scrap the guild wouldn't touch, the broken pieces no one else would fix. But arguing with Audrin was like arguing with the anvil. The other smiths looked away. Not one met my eyes. I gathered my tools and walked out. The Forge District had never felt this long. I passed the open smithies where the guild's masters hammered steel for nobles who paid in full, and the scrapyards where I'd picked through the leavings for years, trying to close the gap between what my hands knew and what they couldn't do. 12 years, and it all ended at the district gate. Only the old salvage woman said anything. "You fixed my kettle," she said quietly, and pressed a copper into my hand. "Held water all winter. The others said it was junk." I took the copper. I didn't trust my voice to answer. Outside the gate, the city went on without me. Merchants, swordsmen, smiths with the guild's mark on their aprons. I stood there with a single tool roll and one copper coin, and 32 years of knowing the work mattered, and nothing to show for it but the cold. The forge I rented was a back room with a dead hearth and a roof that leaked. I sat on the cold floor and counted what I had. 8,420 silver of debt, a worn hammer, and a scrap pile the guild had already rejected twice. Rent was due in 3 days. I'd spent my whole life believing that if you forged honestly enough, the world would notice. It doesn't work that way. The world notices grade marks and coin and the names of the guild. A broke smith with no mark and a failing record has exactly one job: keep his head down and disappear. That was the night I almost gave up. I sat in the dark and thought about the blades that had failed, and wondered if Odron was right, if my stubbornness really had been the thing holding them back. The truth sat in my chest like cold iron. Temporary had lasted 12 years, and it wasn't temporary. It was just my life. That's when it appeared. A panel of ember-orange light, floating over the dead hearth, clean and still as a held breath. Forge system activated. I blinked, and it didn't go away. I reached for it, and it rippled like heat off coals and stayed. "The Forge system counts real work," it read, and I read it 3 times in the dark of that leaking room. Every item the smith genuinely forges, real materials, real heat, real technique, becomes true power in the hands of its wielder. It amplifies real craftsmanship. It never fabricates skill. I almost laughed. A system that promised to make me a better smith, me, the worthless one. But then I read the fine print, and my stomach dropped. It could only forge what I truly knew how to make. My own skill was the ceiling. Every gap in my hands was a gap I couldn't close in the work. The rules were laid out like a contract, and I read them like one. The system paid for verified craft only. A blade actually forged, an edge actually proven. No power appeared from nothing. A faked craft would get nothing. A lazy smith would get nothing. I understood the catch the way only a broke man can. This wasn't a cheat. It was the opposite of a cheat. It was everything I'd already believed, made real. Forging was real work, and the system just made that work count. But materials were finite, and every forge would drain the strength out of me. And there, at the bottom, in smaller text, the smith's skill is finite. Keep learning, or the system withholds the craft. I looked at my worn hammer and my pile of rejected scrap, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt the shape of a way forward. I relit the hearth myself because there was no one else to do it. The scrap pile held a broken blade the guild had thrown back twice, a crack through the spine, an edge like a saw. I didn't look at it as junk. I looked at it the way the system had taught me to, as something that could be made whole. The work was real, and it hurt. I worked the bellows until the coals went white, then hammered the crack shut fold by fold, quenching and reheating, my arms burning and my breath coming in rags. The system watched it all, patient and quiet, counting every honest stroke. When the blade came out of the final quench, the panel flickered. Forge 1, it read, and the number was small, but it was mine. I ran my thumb along the edge, and for the first time in 12 years, a blade I'd made didn't chatter. It rang. It held. The so what came the next morning, the way it always does when honest work starts to show. The old salvage woman's nephew was a butcher, and he'd broken his cleaver on a frozen joint. He came to my door with the pieces and a skeptical look, because a guildless smith is a gamble. I reforged the cleaver while he watched, and this time I wasn't guessing. The system showed me the shape of what was wrong, the way a good smith sees what a cracked blade could be, the temper, the grain, the fault I'd missed for 12 years. When I handed it back, it split the frozen joint clean. He paid me 2 silver and told one man, who told 2 more. By noon, word was moving through the market that the worthless smith had fixed a blade the guild couldn't. The guild had ears everywhere, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they came looking. The next day, there was a queue. A cook's knife, a guardsman's sword with a rolled edge, a chisel that had never held a point. Small jobs, paid in small coin. Forge 2, then Forge 3. The panel ticked, and each number was a debt I could finally see shrinking. It drained me harder than I'd expected. The system didn't just count the work, it took from me for it, pulling strength out of my arms like water from a well. I rationed myself. 3 forges, then rest, then 3 more. Because a smith who burns out forges nothing at all. By evening, the queue was gone, and the scrap pile was smaller, and I'd earned more in one day than I had in a season of guild rejections. The debt was still crushing, but for the first time in 12 years, it was moving the right way. I ate cold bread and slept by the cooling coals. By the 3rd day, the market was saying it out loud. The worthless smith had a hand again, and his blades held. A guild runner heard it from a grain merchant and went back to the guild hall the way runners do, fast and low, carrying a rumor that was about to cost someone. I didn't need the system to tell me what was coming. A guildless smith who fixes what the guild rejects is a problem, because every blade that holds without the guild's mark is a coin the guild didn't earn. Odron wouldn't come himself, he'd send the enforcer. That night, I sat by the cooling hearth and counted my tools, and thought about the crack in the blade I'd fixed first, how the system had shown me the fault, and how I'd finally seen it for myself. Whatever came next, I wasn't going back to being worthless. Far across the city, Guildmaster Odron was hearing the same rumor from a different mouth. The worthless smith, the runner said, had fixed a blade the guild threw back, and the market was talking. Odron set down his wine and smiled the thin smile of a man who sees a problem he can squash. 3 repairs, he said to the empty room, don't make a smith. He was right, and he wasn't. 3 repairs make the beginning of a smith. But the system was already ticking in the corner of my eye, patient and quiet, and it had one more number it was waiting to show me. I didn't know it yet, standing in that leaking back room with my first honest work behind me. But this was the first brick of something that would terrify the whole guild. Forge, 3 women, 0. Rank, F. Reputation, 2. Money, 7,640 in debt. It wasn't much. It was everything. By the 4th day, the queue stretched past the fish stall next door. Word of a guildless smith whose blades held had done what 12 years of honest work never had. It had brought people to my door. I worked from before the coal caught to after the last customer left, and the debt shrank a little every evening. But repairs were cheap, and the system knew it. Fixing a cracked cleaver or rolling an edge was real work, but it wasn't forging, not the way it counted. Forge 4, then Forge 5. The panel ticked, and each one paid a little, and none of it was enough to climb out of the hole. What I needed was a blade, a new blade, forged from nothing, that would hold an edge the way my repairs did. That was the thing that would pay in full, and the thing I was afraid to try. Repairs only asked me to see what was already there. A new blade asked me to be the smith I'd spent 12 years failing to be. The guild sent Boron to the market to watch me, because Boron had always been Audron's favorite, a smith whose hands were quick and whose tongue was quicker. He set up a stall across the square with a line of new blades and a sign that didn't need words. The guild's mark did the talking. He fixes junk, Boron said, loud enough for the whole square, when a merchant asked about the guildless smith. Any half-trained boy can patch a cracked kettle. Forging is the thing that separates a smith from a scavenger. Ask him to make you something from nothing and watch him sweat. I heard him. The whole market heard him. And the worst part was, he wasn't wrong. Not about the difference anyway. Repairs were what I'd survived on for 12 years, because every time I tried to forge something new, something in me had come up short. I stood there with a queue of repairs and a rival who just named the one thing I couldn't do. That night, I closed the shutters and tried to forge a new blade, and the ceiling hit me like a wall. I had the heat, I had the stock, I had 12 years of hammer in my arm, and the blade came out wrong. The grain was crooked, the temper uneven. It snapped in the quench, exactly the way my blades had always snapped. The system didn't scold me. It just showed me, in that patient ember-orange, exactly where I'd failed, the angle of the fold, the beat I'd rushed, the gap in my own hands that I'd never been able to close. My skill was the ceiling. The system could only count what I truly knew how to do. And this, it turned out, I didn't. I sat on the floor with the broken blade in my lap and the old despair trying to crawl back in. 12 years, and I still couldn't do the one thing that would matter. But then I looked again at what the panel had shown me. Not a verdict, but a shape, a fault. And a fault, I'd learned, could be worked. So I studied it the way I'd never been able to study before. The system showed me the fold I'd gotten wrong, and I worked a scrap piece again and again, slower each time, until my hands learned the angle the way a man learns a path in the dark. It drained me. The system took strength for every lesson, but it was teaching me, not giving me. The smith's skill is finite, the panel had said. Keep learning, or the system withholds the craft. I'd read it as a threat. Now I understood it as a promise. The system wouldn't hand me a blade. It would hold the door open while I learned to walk through it on my own 2 feet. By midnight, my scrap had a dozen ruined test pieces, and my arms were shaking. But I'd seen it. The angle, the beat, the rhythm of a true edge. I didn't sleep. I fed the coals and started again, because the difference between a scavenger and a smith was sitting right there in the dark, waiting to be crossed. The next morning, I forged it. Not a repair, a blade. My first new blade in 12 years that I believed in before I'd even quenched it. The steel came to heat, and I worked it fold by fold. And this time, I didn't rush. And this time, the grain ran straight. And when I slid it into the quench, I didn't flinch. It came out whole. I knew before I tested it. There's a weight to a true blade, a way it sits in the hand. I ran my thumb along the edge, and then, slowly, drew it down a length of cord. It cut clean, end to end, and the cord dropped to the floor in 2 pieces. The panel flared, Forge 8, rank E2. I stared at the rank line for a long moment. It had moved, the first time it had ever moved. Not because I'd fixed something, but because I'd forged something. The worthless smith had made a blade, and the system had counted it. I didn't hide it. I carried the blade to the market myself and laid it on my bench beside the repairs, and the merchants came because word of the guildless smith had a pull now. Boron watched from across the square with his arms crossed and his lip curled. A carter tested it against a bone he'd been splitting with an axe. It went through clean. A guardsman hefted it, then ran it through the old test every smith in the city knows. Slice a wet wool blanket once and count the fibers left. There were none. The edge held like a guildmaster's work. How much? The guardsman said, and that was the sound that mattered. Not the whispers, not the stares. A man with coin asking the price of my blade in front of the whole market while the guild's favorite watched. I named a fair price, and he paid it without haggling. The so what came within the hour, the way it always does. 2 of Boran's customers crossed the square to look at my bench, and then a third, and by noon the guild stall had a crowd of 1. Boran, alone, glaring at a line of untouched blades. He cornered me when the market thinned. 1 blade, he said, low and mean. 1 blade in 12 years, and you think you're a smith? It stung because it was true. 1 blade wasn't a body of work, but it was 1 more than the guild had ever let me forge, and the system was counting. I sold 4 blades by evening, each one forged the slow way, each one tested clean. Forge, 8 held, but the panel had a new number waiting at the edge of my vision, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it showed me the cost. The city doesn't hand a guildless smith a living without taking its price. The price came the next morning in the form of an empty stock shelf. I'd burned through the scrap in the bar stock I'd scavenged, and when I went to buy more, the materials merchant looked at the floor and shook her head. "The guilds put the word out," Marta said quietly. "No one sells to you." There it was, the bottleneck the system had warned me about. Materials were finite, and the guild controlled the market. I could forge a true blade, but I couldn't forge it out of thin air. Every piece of steel in the city passed through hands that answered to Odron. I stood there with my 4 sails in my pocket and my stock gone, and understood the real shape of the fight I was in. It wasn't about skill anymore. It was about supply. The guild didn't have to beat my blades. It just had to starve my forge. Across the city, Boron was reporting to Odran with the nervous energy of a man who'd been sent to watch and come back with bad news. "He forged a blade," Boron said. "A real one. The market's talking." Odran didn't look up from his ledger. "Then starve him," Odran said. "The way a man says close a window. He's one smith with no stock and no mark. The market will forget him inside a week." It was cold, and it was sound. Without steel, a smith is just a man with a hammer and a memory. The enforcer was already standing by the door, and I knew it without being told. The guild wasn't going to fight me with blades. It was going to fight me with its real weapon, the network, the supply lines, the quiet word to every merchant who'd ever sold me so much as a scrap. And I had exactly nothing to answer with but the forge. That evening, there was a knock at my door, and when I opened it, I found the last thing in the world I expected. A woman stood in the doorway, half in shadow, one arm hanging limp and useless at her side, and in her good hand a sword, a fine blade, shattered at the hilt. I didn't know her name. I didn't know anything about her except what the shadows let me see. A fighter's stillness, a broken sword, and the kind of pride that doesn't ask for help even when it has nowhere else to go. "The guild said you fix broken things," she said, and her voice was flat. "Is it true?" I looked at the shattered sword, and then at the arm that hung dead at her side, and I understood that she wasn't asking about the sword. Not really. "Come in," I said, and the panel in the corner of my eye ticked, patient and quiet, with a number it wasn't ready to show me yet. She didn't come in when I said the word. She stood in my doorway with the dusk behind her, and I got my first real look at the woman I'd half seen in the dark. 22 maybe, and beautiful in a way that didn't belong here. Long black hair, a fine-boned, proud face, a full, soft figure under a travel-worn robe. But it was the arm that held me, her right arm, her sword arm, hung dead and useless, the sleeve flat, the hand curled. In her other hand, she still carried the shattered sword, hilt and a foot of broken blade, held the way a woman holds the last thing she owns. "Ha Yon Woo," she said, and her voice was flat as a drawn edge. "Once they called me the sword saint of the falling cloud sect." She looked at my forge, at my worn hammer, at me. "Now I am a woman with a broken sword and a dead arm. The market says you fix broken things." I set the sword on the anvil and looked at the break, the way the system had taught me. Not at what was there, but at what the steel had been before it failed. The grain ran true all the way to the shatter. This had been a masterwork, the kind of blade that doesn't break, the kind that was broken. She watched me with the stillness of a woman who'd learned to read men's faces for lies. "It broke when my arm broke," she said. "Elder Somon took my arm with one strike and my sword with the next, then threw me out the gate and told the sect I was spent." Her good hand tightened on her knee. "Why?" I asked, and she laughed once, without humor. "Because I was better than his disciple. A sword saint who outshines the elder's heir is a threat, not a treasure." She looked up at me. "Do you believe me, Smith, or am I just another broken thing?" I could have lied, told her she was still a saint and the sect was wrong, but I'd spent 12 years hearing the truth about my own work from a guild that was right and wrong in the same breath, and I knew what cheap comfort sounded like, so I told her the truth instead. "I can't fix your arm," I said. "I'm a blacksmith, not a healer. Bone and sinew are beyond my hammer." Her face didn't change, but her eyes went quieter, the way a man's do when he's braced for the next blow. "But I can forge you a blade that doesn't need 2 good arms." That stopped her. A blade that doesn't need 2 good arms. I didn't make it sound like a promise. I made it sound like work, the only honest thing I had. "The sword I can reforge, The arm I can't, but the woman holding the sword is still yours. If you want her back, that's where we start." She was quiet for a long time, and I let the quiet stand, because a woman who's been discarded doesn't need another man talking at her. She needed to see the forge, and the scrap pile, and the leaking roof, and decide for herself whether a worthless smith in a back room was a risk worth taking. "What do you want?" she asked at last, and there it was, the broken trust laid bare. Every man who'd helped her since the fall had wanted something, a debt, a body, a story to sell. I heard it in the word want, like a coin she'd already decided I'd take. "Labor," I said. "The forge needs fire, coal hauled, bellows worked, quench water changed. You've one good arm, one more than I have while holding the hammer. Work, and I forge the blade, nothing else." Her eyes searched my face for the lie and didn't find it, which only made her more suspicious. She took the bellows that evening, and I learned in a minute that a one-armed sword saint was still stronger than most men with two. She worked the bag in a steady rhythm, feeding the coals until they went white, heat climbing off them like a promise. "Faster when I say," I told her. "Slower when I say. The steel listens." She didn't talk back. She watched the coals and matched my rhythm the way a fighter reads a blade's line. And for the first time, the forge felt like more than a leaking room with a debt on the floor. The system ticked as the night's repairs came out whole. Forge 9, then forge 10. It was the arm that undid me a little. Watching her work the bellows one-handed, jaw set, sweat at her temple, I understood broken things. They don't stop working because they're hurt. They find another way to hold the load. "You're staring," she said. "I'm counting," I said. "You missed a beat." Old Mara came by with a cracked kettle, the way she did. Took one look at Yen Wu at the bellows and set it on the bench without a word. "Held water all winter," she said, the old joke between us, until it didn't. She paid me 2 copper and didn't ask who the woman was. That was the test, I realized later, and I hadn't known I was taking it. Yan Wu watched the whole exchange, the salvage woman who'd believed in me when no one else would, and me fixing her kettle for 2 copper like it was the most important blade in the world. "You fix a kettle for nothing," she said. "Not nothing," I said. 2 copper, and a woman who doesn't look away." She turned that over, slow and careful, and something in her shoulders eased by a degree no one else would notice. It wasn't trust, but it was the first room I'd been given to earn it. She stayed, not because I'd won her over, I hadn't, but because a woman with a dead arm and a broken sword has 2 choices, and one is to keep walking until the road runs out. She chose the forge, and said it like a woman claiming a debt. "I'll work, you forge, and if you lie to me, Smith, I'll know." The panel didn't flicker so much as settle, like a scale taking a weight. "Woman, 1, it read, and I understood the number had nothing to do with coin. The first broken thing the world had thrown away had come to my door. The system wasn't just counting blades anymore. It was counting the people who stayed. "Then we start with the arm," I said. "Not to heal it, to build around it." I picked up the broken sword and laid it on the anvil again, and this time I didn't see a shattered blade. I saw the thing it could still be, a sword remade for a hand that had to learn everything over from nothing. I spent 2 days reading the break in her sword the way a man reads a fault line. The system showed me the grain, the temper, the exact fold where the steel gave under Somun's strike, and something I hadn't expected. The blade hadn't failed. It had been sacrificed. She'd taken the elder's blow on the sword to save her own life. That told me the woman I was dealing with better than any story. You don't break a masterwork like that by accident. She'd thrown the best thing she owned into the path of the strike, and it had held just long enough. The break sat clean at the hilt because she'd kept the guard up. A sword saint to the end. Forging for a one-armed fighter meant rebalancing everything. Weight forward, grip rebuilt for a reversed hand, edge honed for a draw, not a slash. Work I'd never attempted, and my skill was the ceiling. I had the shape in my head, but the hands weren't there yet. Keep the coals hot. I'll fail a few times before I don't. Word of a sword saint at the worthless smith's door moved the way such words do. Fast, wrong, everywhere at once. By the 3rd day, the market said the guildless smith had taken in a broken sword saint, and the guild's ears caught it first. Boron's face, when he heard, was the color of old ash. The repairs kept coming too, and the system kept counting. Forge, 12. Forge, 13. Forge, 14. Each a small, honest number. Each a coin toward the debt still sitting on me like a stone. REP 12, the panel read. My name was climbing, and a name that climbs is a name somebody comes looking for. But the deeper rumor was the one that worried me, the one about the falling cloud sect. Discarding a sword saint isn't the same as forgetting her. The sect had put her out, and now a guildless smith was forging her a blade. Somewhere Elder Somun was hearing the same words from a different mouth, and he wouldn't like them. That night, she didn't sleep in the corner I'd cleared for her. She sat by the dying coals with her back to the wall, the way a fighter sleeps, and watched the broken sword the way a woman watches the one thing she won't let anyone take twice. The sect will come, she said quietly. Somun doesn't leave loose ends. Then let them come, I said, and I meant it, though I had no idea how I'd back it. You're not their loose end anymore. She looked at me a long moment, and I saw the first crack in the stone of her. Not trust, not yet, but something softer. Gratitude, maybe, or just the exhaustion of a woman finally allowed to sit down. Forge, 14-Women 1, rank E2, rep 12, money 4,120 in debt, the panel read, patient in the dark, more than I'd had, still not enough, but there was a sword saint in my forge and a blade to build her, and for the first time since the guild threw me out, the work had a face on it. 2 days I tried to forge her blade, and 2 days the steel laughed at me. A sword waited for a reversed hand draw, falls one way while the edge rolls another, and every quench said I'd missed it. The first blade cracked, the second warped in the oil like a man twisting out of a grip. Yen Wu worked the bellows through every failure without a word of blame, which was worse than blame, because I could see in the set of her jaw that she'd expected it. Discarded people learn to expect the failure of others. It's the first lesson the world teaches them, and it's the hardest one to unlearn. The system was patient in its ember-orange, showing me what was wrong. Not a verdict, but a shape. The weight sat too far forward for a one-handed draw. The grip was built for a hand that would never close. I'm close, I said, unsure. Keep the coals white. She nodded, and the bellows breathed. That night, I studied the reverse grip the way I'd once studied the fold I couldn't make. Failing, reading the failure, failing smaller. The system showed me the line a reversed blade travels, how a draw cuts instead of a slash, and I worked scrap after scrap until my offhand knew it like my good hand. Yan Wu trained her left arm in the yard while I worked, like watching someone relearn to breathe. Right-handed to the bone, she moved a wooden stick through the forms with a hand that shook and missed and tried again, and never stopped. A saint was just a woman who refused to let the breaking be the end. You're holding the weight too high, I called once, and she didn't snap. She adjusted, and the next pass was cleaner. She'd been taught to read a blade better than anyone alive, and now she was teaching herself a whole new body. Forge, 16, the panel read, and it took strength for every honest stroke. The breakthrough came on the third day, at the worst possible hour, the way they always do. I'd rebuilt the tang short and canted the grip to lock against a reversed palm, and moved the balance back over the knuckles instead of the tip. Not a sword saint's blade yet, but a shape that could become one. This is it, I told her, and she looked up from the yard, her offhand still shaking. If it holds, you'll draw it one-handed. If it doesn't, I start again. She didn't ask for reassurance. She walked in, took her place at the bellows, and fed the coals, steady and patient, waiting for me to be ready. I fed the forge slow, and the steel came up through the colors. Dull red, bright red, orange, then the white that means it's time. The system ticked at the edge of my sight, and for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel the ceiling pressing down. I felt the door opening instead. The forging was real, and it took everything out of me. I worked the hammer through the folds, Yan Wu kept the coals white, and the steel came together the way it only does when two people hold one rhythm. Fold, heat, grain straight, temper taking, the quench waiting like a held breath. My arms burned. The system pulled strength from me for every stroke, and I rationed myself. 3 heats, then rest, then 3 more, because a smith who empties the well forges nothing. Forge 18, Forge 19, Forge 20. The panel ticked. Yeonwoo never asked if I could finish. She just kept feeding the fire. At the last, when the blade went into the quench, I held it steady the way a true blade wants to be held, and I didn't flinch. The oil hissed and smoked. The steel sang a little, cooling, and when I drew it out, whole and straight, I knew before I tested it, this one was going to hold. The panel flared when the blade came out of the quench, and this time it was a jump, not a tick. Rank D3, it read, and I stared. Rank had never moved on a blade before, not for a repair, not for a sword sold in the market. It moved now, for this one. The system had weighed the work and found it heavier than anything I'd forged. I handed the blade to Yeonwoo grip first, and she took it in her left hand the way you'd take a newborn. It's heavier than my old sword, she said quietly. I'd moved the weight into the spine to let the draw cut. It has to be. The draw carries it. She felt the cant, and something crossed her face like hope. It's not finished, I said, before either of us got ahead of the work. The edge needs the stone, the grip needs wrapping, and you need to prove it in the yard. But it's a blade. My skill was the ceiling, and tonight, for this one, it wasn't. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The proving came the next morning, and half the district turned out to watch. A sword saint testing a blade is a thing people cross a street to see, and word had spread that the worthless smith had forged her one. They pressed the fence and held their breath. I stood at the door with my heart in my throat. She drew, left-handed, from a reversed scabbard in one motion, and the draw itself did the cutting, as I'd built it to. The practice post split clean at the waist. She moved through 3 forms, one armed and liquid, the blade following her like it knew her hand. The crowd made a sound I'd never heard before. When she stopped, she was breathing hard, tears on her face, and I don't think she knew they were there. It holds, she said, and her voice cracked. Forge, 21, the panel read. Patient. Rep, 19. The worthless smith's name was climbing, and I knew, the way I always knew, the cost was already on its way. They came at dusk, with the light behind them, so you couldn't count them. 4 disciples in falling cloud gray, and a palanquin behind them that didn't need opening to know who was inside. The neighborhood emptied. A sect doesn't come to a forge district for a broken sword saint unless it means to settle something. Yeonwoo came out and stood beside me, the new blade in her left hand, and she didn't look afraid. She looked the way she must have before the fall, done waiting for the world to be fair. So Moon, she said, low. He won't come out first. He'll send the disciples for the sword, then me. The sword is yours, I said. I forged it for you. She glanced at me, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's the problem, Smith. In the Falling Cloud sect, nothing a discarded woman owns is hers, especially a blade the elder didn't make. I understood then, not the sword, but who got to own a broken woman's comeback. The palanquin opened, and Elder Somun stepped down onto a stage he owns, old the way a mountain is old, gray-haired, unhurried, the stillness of 50 years of being the strongest thing in any room. His eyes passed over my forge, my apron, me, and settled on Yeonwoo like a man collecting a debt. The sect has come to reclaim its property, Somun said, and his voice carried without rising. The sword saint belongs to the fallen cloud. Her body, her skill, the blade she carries are ours by right of expulsion. He didn't look at me. In his accounting, a smith was a tool, not a party to the contract. Yeonwoo stepped forward before I could answer, the blade steady in her left hand as a lifetime. The sect threw me out, she said, her voice flat as a drawn edge. You broke my arm and cast me from the gate. I am not your property. I am not a loose end. I am a woman with a blade I was given, and I will not be reclaimed. Somun's disciples moved first, 4 gray shapes closing in, and I learned in a heartbeat what a one-armed sword saint was worth. Her left hand was still slow, still wrong, still learning, but the blade was built for her, and the draw did what it was forged to do. The first disciple's sword rang off the fence. The second and third came together, and she didn't try to be the woman she'd been. She fought as I'd forged her to fight. Draw, cut, step, draw again, the blade's weight carrying each motion, her broken arm only steering. Not graceful, desperate, precise, beautiful. A thing that had no right to work, working anyway. So Moon watched still, and when his last disciple fell, he looked at me, not at her, at me. "This is your doing, Smith," he said, flat, which was worse. "You think you forged a weapon? You forged a debt the sect will collect in its own time." He stepped into the sit-in, and the sect withdrew. Not a retreat, a promise. The street was empty again, and Yan-Wu stood in the middle of it, blade still in hand, breathing hard, the morning's tears still drying on her face. She didn't put the sword down. She looked at it like a woman looks at a door finally unlocked, then at me, and the stone in her cracked a little further open. "He'll come back," she said. "So-mun doesn't make promises he doesn't keep." I knew it. The system had warned me that every masterpiece paints a target, but standing there with a sword saint holding the blade I'd made, I couldn't find it in me to be afraid. "Then we'll be ready. The forge doesn't sleep." Forge, 21. Women, 1. Rank, D3. Rep, 19. Money, 1,970 in debt. The panel read in the dark. The debt was still heavy, but there was a blade the sect wanted, and a woman who'd stood her ground, and I understood at last what the system counted toward. Not swords, but people standing back up. The commission came 3 days after the sect left, and it came with a purse. A merchant lord who'd heard of the sword saint's blade sent his steward to my door with a commission for a dueling saber, a job a guildsmith would kill for, and one I'd never been offered in 12 years. "My lord wants it in a fortnight," the steward said, setting the purse on the bench without asking. "Men like that don't ask. 200 silver on delivery." I made my voice steady. 400, and the materials are mine to source. He didn't blink, so I'd underpriced it. But 400 silver was more than I'd earned in a season of guild rejections, enough to dent the debt that had ridden me since I was thrown out. Yan-Wu watched from the bellows with something new in her eyes. Respect, maybe. The kind that costs nothing to earn and everything to lose. I went to Marta for the steel, and this time she didn't look at the floor. "The guild's word still stands," she said quietly, "but a merchant lord's commission isn't a word I can ignore. I'll sell, off the books, and if you tell anyone it came from me, we never met." She named a price that stung. I paid it. The steel she handed over was good, better than the scrap I'd been salvaging, with the gray bloom of a proper fold. I carried it home like a man carrying the first honest chance of his life, the guild's eyes on my back. Boron watched me pass like a man tasting something spoiled. "A commission," he said, loud enough to carry. "The scavengers moving up in the world." I kept walking. The worst thing you can do to a rival like Boran. But I filed to look away. A guild that lets a guildless smith take a merchant lord's commission is about to do something about it. I forged the saber over 4 days, and the good steel fought me the way good steel does. It wanted more heat, more care, more of everything I had. Yan-Wu kept the coals white, and we fell into the rhythm the way you fall into a shared breath. Fold, heat, hammer, quench. The system ticked with every stroke. A dueling saber wants to be light and live in the hand, and I'd learned from Yan-Wu's blade the difference between a weapon that carries weight and one that drags it. I canted the hilt, moved the balance to the guard, and honed the edge to shave a hair lengthwise. Forge, 25, the panel read, then Forge, 26. By the 4th day, the saber was done, the best work of my life. I didn't mark it, no guild stamp, and a steward wouldn't pay full price for an unmarked blade. Yan-Wu watched me wrap it. "You should sign it anyway. It's yours," she said low. "When I've earned a mark that means something," I said, looking at the blank tang. I delivered the saber myself. A commission is a contract between hands, not words. The steward tested it the way such men do. Silk scarf, wet wool blanket, a hair laid on the edge. And when it passed all 3, he counted out the 400 silver without haggling. The highest compliment a man like that can pay. 400 silver. I walked home heavy in purse, light in chest, doing the arithmetic 3 times over. The debt had been 1,970 silver when the commission came in. Now it was 1,570. Still a hole, but I could see across it for the first time in 12 years. The panel flickered as I walked, patient and quiet, counting the silver against the debt. I stood at my door, purse in hand, and felt a thing I'd forgotten, a debt finally moving. One more honest job, and I might climb out of the hole. 12 years of worthless, and a saber had bought me a view of the far side. Yan Wu found her own commission the same week, the way a sword saint does, with her blade and her name. Grin, the monster hunt broker, had posted a bounty on a dire boar gutting drovers on the North Road, and she took the contract and signed it with her left hand in a script that wavered but held. I tried to talk her out of it. Her offhand still shook through the forms, and a dire boar doesn't care how far you've come. She cut me off with a look. I didn't come here to sit by a forge and get better, she said. I came here to be a sword saint again, and a saint takes the contracts a saint takes. She was gone 2 days, and I didn't sleep either of them. She came back limping, tunic torn, dragging a dire boar's tusk the size of my forearm. It's dead, she said, dropping it at my feet. The draw carried it. Then she smiled with her whole face, the first time since she'd arrived. Your blade did that, Smith. We cleaned the tusk that night, and she talked, really talked, the way a woman talks when the stone breaks. She told me of the sect's white halls, the discipline she'd loved, the disciples she'd been ordered to lose to. I couldn't, she said, even after they told me to. I couldn't throw a match. That's why he broke my arm. It was the first time she'd told me the whole of it, and I understood what it had cost her to say it out loud. Trust is a blade, and it cuts both ways. Every time you hand it over, you risk the edge coming back. She'd been cut enough to stop handing it to anyone. Now she was handing it to me, one honest inch at a time. I trust the blade, she said at last, and she met my eyes and held them. And I think I'm starting to trust the man who made it. Don't make me regret that. I nodded. Nothing I could say wouldn't cheapen it. REP 27, the panel read. The number meant more than coin now. A sword saint's name and mine climbing together. The last of the debt died on a cold morning, when the broker's bounty and a handful of repairs landed at once. I counted it out. Every coin, every ledger line, 12 years of being worth less than I owed. And when the last copper closed the account, I sat down hard. I hadn't known how heavy the debt was until it was gone. The panel flared, and this time the number didn't sit in debt at all. It sat in the black. Money, plus $1,460, it read, and rank C4, and I stared like a man at a sunrise he'd stopped believing in. The worthless Smith wasn't in debt. He was ahead for the first time in his life, and the system had counted every honest stroke. Yon Wu came in and saw my face, and she didn't ask. She picked up the ledger, read the bottom line, and set it down. You did it, she said quietly. The guild threw you out for being worthless, and you're standing here in the black. I laughed, a little broken. Almost. I had help with the last of it. Across the city, Odron was hearing about the debt like a bell tolling for his own house. Boron stood at the desk, hands twisting at his apron, and reported it all. The commission, the saber, the dire boar, the guildless smith who'd climbed out. Odron listened without moving, and the silence was loudest of all. He's out of debt, Boron said, like ash. The sword saint's name is climbing with his. The market's saying he forges blades the guild can't. Odron set down his pen, and for the first time I saw something in his face that wasn't contempt. Fear. A smith who owes nothing and fears nothing is a smith you can't own. Then we stop letting the market decide, Odron said, his voice soft the way a drawn blade is soft. A guildless smith has no charter, no protection, no right to sell a commissioned blade inside these walls. The enforcer was already at the door, and I knew the truce was over before it started. That evening was the first quiet one we'd had in weeks, and we spent it the way people spend the first quiet after a long fight, sitting by the coals, saying not much, letting the warmth do the work. Yan Wu held her blade across her knees and studied the grain, then spoke. It needs a name. A sword doesn't need a name to cut, I said, and she shook her head. This one does. It was forged for a hand that had to learn everything over. It should be called something that remembers that. I'm calling it unbroken, because the arm broke and the woman broke, and neither of us stayed down. I had nothing to say to that, so I nodded, and the fire crackled between us. And for the first time since the guild threw me out, I felt something that wasn't fear or debt or the grind of surviving. Quiet and warm, with a sword saint in it who'd named the blade I made her after the thing we both refused to let happen. The rain came that night, and with it, At the far end of the district, a figure I almost missed. She stood at the gate in the downpour, hood up, and under it I made out the wreck of what had been fine knight's armor, dented, darkened, one pauldron missing, hanging off her like a banner after a lost battle. I couldn't see her face or her name, and she didn't move or call out. She just stood in the rain with the stillness of a woman who'd run as far as she could and had nowhere left. Then she turned, slow, and walked into the dark, and I was left with only the shape of her and the feeling I'd seen the next broken thing coming. Forge 29. Women 1. Rank C4. Rep 27. Money plus 1,460. The panel read, Patient in the rain. The debt cleared, the name climbing, and somewhere past the gate a knight in battered armor walked the road to my door. The system had one more number waiting to show me. It always did. She came to the door at dawn, the night from the rain, and in the pale light I got my first look at her. 24, maybe. Striking. Nothing of courtly softness, but tall, broad-shouldered, the full curves of a woman who'd lived in armor, ash-blonde hair in a warrior's braid, eyes the gray-blue of good steel. The armor told the rest before she spoke. Fine once, watch plate, a commander's crest, now dented and darkened, missing its left pauldron, straps retied a dozen times. Her hands, set on my doorframe, calloused a swordswoman's way. She'd walked far, she'd bled, and she still wore it, the only thing left that was hers. Min Seo-ah, she said, her voice low and rough, used to nothing but orders and silence. Knight of the City Watch, or I was until Commander Harlan framed me for a lord's murder and threw me out to die on the road. She looked past me. They say you reforge broken things. Is it true? I gave her water, and she drank like a woman who'd forgotten water could be given. Then she told me the story flat, like a soldier reporting a retreat. A summons to a lord's study at night, the lord already dead at the door, her sword broken by the hearth, and Commander Harlan naming her guilty before she drew breath. He pronounced me guilty in front of the whole watch, she said, her hand steady even when her voice wanted not to be. They exiled me before the blade had cooled. I never fought it. What was the point? A dead lord, my sword in pieces, the commander's word against mine? The city saw what it wanted to see. I'd heard the same shape of story from Yun-woo, and it didn't get easier the second time. A woman broken by the institution that raised her, thrown out with a mark she couldn't prove false. Do you believe me? She asked, the same edge Yun-woo's had. Not a plea, a test. I believe you walked here. That's a start. Let me see the sword, I said. The pieces. Natural for a smith to ask. A blade that broke beside a body will tell you, if you know how to read it, whether it broke in a fight or after. But the instant the words left my mouth, she closed up like a gate against a siege. No, she said, and there was no give in it. Her hand moved to her ribs, over her heart, guarding something sewn against the skin. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I've carried the one thing that could prove my innocence through a year of exile, and I've learned what happens when a woman trusts the wrong man with the truth. I didn't press. You can't pry open a framed woman like a cold weld. You have to let the heat come first. Then keep it, I said. Show me when you're ready, or don't. The offer stands. She watched me a long moment, and I understood what this one would cost, more than the last. Yun-woo had been quiet through it, at the bellows, and when Soa asked to work, she spoke. You'll feed the fire and haul coal like the rest of us, she said. Not unkind, just honest. The smith's forge runs on labor, not titles. A knight, cleared name or dead, is a woman with two hands. That's worth something here. Seo-ah looked at Yun-woo, her dead arm, her steady eyes, and something passed between them that needed no words. Two women the world had thrown away, recognizing each other across a forge. I can work, Seo-ah said. I've done worse for less, but I won't be a charity case. I pay my own way, or I don't stay. So I set the terms as I'd set them for Yun-woo, labor for a place by the fire, and no man's name over hers. If you want to clear your name, that's a longer forge, but it starts the same way. She nodded once, sharp, like a knight accepting a command. Then I'll start now. Where's the coal? Seo-ah worked like a woman repaying a debt with her body, hauling coal and pumping the bellows with a strength that made even Yon Woo raise an eyebrow. A night's conditioning doesn't leave just because the watch does. She fell into the forge's rhythm within an hour, and the coals never burned so clean. I forged through the commissions while she learned the trade, and the system counted it all. Forge 33, forge 34, forge 35. The panel ticked, each number a coin and a little more name climbing the district. The forge was fuller than it had ever been. 2 women, a fire, a smith who'd stopped forging alone. But I could see the weight Seok-ho carried, the flinch at the edges of her stillness whenever the gate creaked. A framed woman doesn't stop running just because she's found a roof. She watched the road, always, like a soldier watching a line about to be crossed. Harlan's shadow was long, reaching past the watch's walls. The test came in the market, as such tests do. A guardsman with a loose tongue and a grudge. "A framed knight, is it?" he said, loud enough for the square, as Seok-ho walked beside me to sell the day's repairs. The watch don't throw out the innocent. A killer's a killer, no matter whose forge she warms at. Seok-ho went still the way a sword goes still before a draw, and I watched her decide whether to answer with fists or silence. Then she looked at me, and I saw the question. Would I stand with her, or step away like everyone else had? I stepped forward. The smith vouches for his own. That's how it works here. The guardsman backed down. A man picking a fight with a smith, a knight, and a sword saint has to be very drunk or very paid, and he wasn't drunk. But the damage was done. The word killer had been said in the open, and it would stick like soot to a forge wall. Seok-ho didn't thank me. She just nodded once. It was enough. That night I did the smallest job in the forge, and it mattered more than any commission. I took the missing pauldron, straps cut, plate dented past wearing, and straightened it, plate by careful plate, until it would sit a shoulder again. No masterpiece, just honest work, asking nothing but a steady hand. Seok-ho watched me the whole time, and I could feel her hunting for the trick, the thing I'd want in return. There wasn't one. When I handed it back, riveted and whole, she turned it over in her calloused hands. "Why? You know I can't pay you for this." "You already are," I said. "You're working the bellows." She looked at me a long moment, then did something I didn't expect. She set the pauldron down, took a breath, and let the armor of her come down off her shoulders, just a little. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Most men want something back from a woman with my face. You just work." I shrugged. "I'm a smith." She stayed, and the panel settled the way it had for Yon Woo, a weight onto the scale, quiet and certain. 2, it read, the number sitting next to Yon Woo's like a second brick in a wall I hadn't known I was building. 2 broken women now, both thrown away, both finding their feet at my forge. Yon Woo took it in stride, as ever, with a nod in new chores, but I caught her watching Seok-ho with something like recognition. They'd both been broken by men with titles, and both decided the breaking wasn't the end. The forge had gone from a leaking back room to the start of something I didn't have a word for. Forge 38, the panel read, and Rep 36. The numbers moved faster now. The work wasn't just mine. A forge with 2 women runs hotter, and every blade that left the anvil carried a little of their name with mine. The district said the worthless smith was building something. The watch was hearing it. Far across the city, in the cold halls of the watch, Commander Harlan was reading a report that had just found him. A framed knight named Min Seok-ho, seen in the forge district, at a guildless smith's side. He read it twice, the way a man reads a ghost's name, then set it down on the map before him. "She's alive," he said to the lieutenant, his voice calm the way deep water is calm. "And she's talking." The lieutenant shifted. "No one's believed her so far, Commander." Harlan didn't look up. Belief is a slow fire. A framed woman with a forge and a growing name is a smolder I can't afford to let catch. He traced a line on the map, Watch Hall to Forge District, and I didn't need to be there to read it. The sect had come with a palanquin and disciples. A knight commander would come with the full weight of the watch to bury a loose end before it could speak. The cost of the second masterpiece was already coming. That night the forge was warmer than ever. Yon Woo one side of the fire, Seok-ho the other, me between them, the quiet easy for once. Seok-ho had cleaned her armor and hung the watch crest by the door. Not hidden, but kept, a thing to redeem. They'll come, she said, quietly. Harlan won't leave me breathing. Then they'll find 3 of us, Yeon-woo said. No bravado in it, just the flat certainty of a woman who'd already stood her ground. So-ah looked at her, then at me, and something passed between us. The world would keep coming for the broken things it threw away, and we'd keep standing up to meet it. Forge, 38. Women, 2. Rank, C4. Rep, 36. Money, plus 4,830. The panel read. Patient in the dark. 2 women now. A knight framed for murder she didn't commit. A commander coming to bury her. The worthless smith had climbed out of the hole. Now the real fight was walking toward him. 2 broken women now sat in my forge, and the second carried the heavier weight. Min So-ah had been a knight of the watch until the night a lord died and her own sword was found broken beside the body. They exiled her before the blade cooled, and she never fought the verdict. That morning she finally told me the whole of it in a voice worn flat. I was summoned to his study. He was already dead. My sword lay by the hearth in pieces, and Commander Harlan named me guilty before I could speak. She had never touched the man, she said. She never reached the door. I believed her, not because I'm kind, but because I've spent 12 years reading metal, and her story didn't match the break she described. Show me the sword, I said, the pieces. Her eyes came up, wary and guarded, and I saw the one thing she'd kept hidden through a long exile. She'd sewn a shard of her own broken sword into the hem of her cloak, all through the exile, a woman keeping the one piece of truth nobody believed. She laid it on my anvil, and I bent over it with the lamp, and the system bent with me, patient and orange at the edge of my sight. The break was wrong. A blade snapped in a fight, tears along the grain, and bends at the edge first. This one didn't. It was a clean, cold fracture, struck through the spine after the fact, the kind a man makes in a vice when he wants a weapon to look ruined. I'd seen that lie in the guild scrap 100 times. This sword was broken on purpose, I said, after it was taken from you. The system agreed, laying the fault bare, as it always did. Not a verdict, but a shape. So-ah stared at the shard, and for the first time since I'd met her, something in her face cracked open and let the light in. I made her a promise I had no right to make, and meant it anyway. I'll forge you a new blade, I said, and a shield, and I'll prove in front of whatever court holds your name that the sword which condemned you was broken by the man who framed you. Yeon-woo looked up sharp. The materials wouldn't be easy. The guild still had its word out, and a knight's sword needs steel I didn't have. So I went over what I'd scavenged and what Gren the broker owed me, and began to draw. A true blade and a great shield wide as a door, audacious and exactly what she needed. So-ah watched me work the numbers and said quietly, "They'll hang you beside me if this fails." I didn't look up. Then I'd better forge it right. It wasn't bravado. It was the system's first lesson. Honest craft is the only ground a man can stand on. I lit the coals white and put her to work, because a forge this big doesn't run on one man's arms. So-ah held the tongs while I hammered, and the blade came up fold by fold, slow and straight-grained, the way a true blade does. The system drank its due from my strength with every stroke. By the second fold, the panel ticked. Forge, 43, it read, and the number felt like a held breath. But the craft is the thing, not the count. Every fold was an answer to the shard on my bench, proof of how a real blade breaks against a framed one. I was forging a weapon and an alibi in one heat. It came out of the quench hole in ringing, and I knew it would hold. So-ah took it and hefted it once, and her eyes went wet and hard at once. "It's mine," she said, like she was arguing with the whole city. "No one's taken that from me before and given it back." The sword was hers. The shield was the proof I'd promised. A great shield isn't hammered so much as coaxed, plate over plate, each layer keyed to the last, and it took everything I had left. My arms burned, my sight grayed, and still I kept the heat true. A shield that fails is a death you hand a friend. When the last plate was riveted and the hole stood on the anvil like a small wall, the panel flared and wouldn't settle. Forge, 48, rank, B5. I stared at the rank line until my eyes ached. The forge had climbed again, not on repairs, but on a masterpiece. The "so what" came with the morning, as it always does. A B-rank shield forged by a guildless smith is news, and news has legs. By the time the coals were cool, half the market knew the exiled knight had new steel, and across the city, Commander Harlan would be hearing it too, and reaching for a way to stop it. We took the proof to the square where the watch kept its steps, and the crowd came, because an exiled knight in new steel is a thing people stop to see. Seok-ho set the great shield and drew the sword, and a clerk of the watch, a man with a nervous pen, was pushed forward to witness it. I laid the shard beside a fresh break I'd made in scrap, and walked the clerk through it, slowly. A blade broken in battle tears here and here. This shard snapped cold, through the spine, after the fact. His pen stopped. The crowd's murmur changed pitch. Someone said the word frame out loud. Seok-ho didn't speak. She let the steel speak for her, and it said what no exile's oath ever could. Rep 48, the panel read by evening, and the number had weight. A name was coming back out of the dirt, and there were men in this city who would pay to keep it buried. The hearing came fast, forced by the crowd and the clerk's trembling testimony. They didn't let Harlan sit over it. A magistrate was brought in, a tired old woman who'd seen too many soldiers lie. Seok-ho stood straight in her new steel and told the truth once, plainly, and this time the city had to hear it. The shard did the rest. Against a fresh battle break, against a dozen test blades I'd broken that morning, the false fracture stood out like a scar on clean skin. The magistrate set down her pen. This woman was framed, she said, and the hall went still. She'd named a crime and left it on the commander's bench. Min Seok-ho was proven innocent, and the city's coin moved the moment the words left the old woman's mouth. Commissions, backers, a guardsman's retainer. By nightfall, the ledger read money, plus $9,720. We'd won, and we'd never been in more danger. Across the city, Commander Harlan heard the verdict from a runner and sat very still, the way a snake goes still before it strikes. He'd built the frame himself, killed the lord for a bribe, broke the sword to hang the blame on the one knight too honest to buy off. Now a worthless blacksmith had pulled his lie apart with a hammer. The bottleneck had a name, a rank, and the whole watch behind it. Harlan couldn't reopen the case without reopening his own guilt, so he'd do what such men always do, bury the proof and the people who carried it. He reached for a blank warrant and began to write a new charge. I didn't need the system to tell me the shape of it. I'd spent 12 years in a guild that taught me exactly how institutions protect their own. The exoneration wasn't the end of the fight. It was the moment the fight stopped being about steel and became about survival. That evening, we sat in the cooling forge and counted what the truth had bought us. Seok-ho had her name back, and a target painted where her heart used to be. Harlan won't come himself, she said, low. He'll send the watch, or men wearing its colors, and call it law. We need to be gone before it lands. Yeon-woo was already checking the blade on her good arm, the way a sword saint checks steel before a storm. 2 broken women and a worthless smith, and the whole watch on the other side of the door. The system had warned me from the first night. Every masterpiece shifts power, and power does not go quietly. But the forge was B rank now, and B rank means people watch, and people watching is its own kind of shield. I looked at the two of them and understood what I was really building. Not weapons, but a found family the world threw away, hammered back together. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The knock came in the rain, late. The same knock that had brought Yeon-woo and Seok-ho before it. The knock of a broken thing with nowhere else to go. I opened the door a hand's width and found a woman in the downpour, half in shadow, and in her arms she held a staff, snapped clean in two. I couldn't see her face, only the shape of her in the rain, in the ruin of the staff she clutched like the last thing she owned. The guild said you fix broken things, she said, and her voice was cracked from crying or cold or both. Is it true? The same words Yeon-woo had spoken. The world keeps sending the same question. I looked at the shattered staff and then at her and understood the staff wasn't the only thing broken. But that was the story the shadows hadn't shown me yet. Come in, I said. The panel in the corner of my eye went patient and quiet. Forge, 48. Women, 2. Rank, B5. Rep, 48. Money, plus $9,720. Her name was Kang Yu-na, and I learned it only after she'd stopped shivering by the coals. 20 years old, silver-white hair plastered to her face, violet eyes gone dull, the way a spent lamp goes dull. In her arms lay a mage's staff, snapped in two, its focus a scatter of powder in her palm. She was willowy, with the soft, full curves of a woman who'd lived in a library instead of a barracks, and her scholar's hands were raw and split from weeks on the roads. Nobody wants a cast-out mage. The tower said I was spent, she told me, and the word came out like a curse. I'd heard that word before. When a mage's spirit breaks, the tower doesn't heal them. It discards them, because a mage without mana is just a girl with a stick. She'd come because the market whispered I fixed broken things. She didn't know I'd once been called spent too, in a different tongue. Worthless. She told us how it happened in a voice that never once rose. A backlash in the tower's high ritual, a channel forced past what her spirit could carry, and then nothing. The focus cracked, the staff snapped, and the spark that had made her a mage simply went out. The archmages looked once and signed the writ. Spent. They took my name off the rolls the same day, she said, gave me back my snapped staff and a coin, and told me a mage without mana is no one's problem anymore. I watched Yeonwoo and So-ah go still beside me, because they'd both heard their own story in hers. The same door, the same long walk away. What frightened me most wasn't the staff. Wood and crystal, I understand. It was the emptiness behind her eyes, the way she'd already decided she was spent. You can reforge a broken blade. Reforging a person who stopped believing anything is left inside them is harder than any steel. I laid the two halves of her staff on the anvil and let the system read them, and what it showed was strange and hopeful at once. The wood could be rejoined. Enough heartwood was left to take a bind. The crystal was the problem. A mage's focus has to be grown into the staff, and hers was powder. The staff can be remade, I told her, but the focus must be replaced, and a real focus doesn't come cheap, and the staff is the easy half. I looked at her until she met my eyes. The harder half is the spark. The staff only channels what's in you. If nothing's left, I've built you a walking stick. I expected her to flinch. Instead, she laughed, thin and bitter. Then you've wasted your kindness, Smith. There's nothing left to channel. That's what spent means. She said it like it was settled, and I'd heard that tone before, in my own voice, the night I almost gave up in a leaking room. I didn't argue with her. I lit the coals and went to work, because arguing with despair is like arguing with the anvil, and I'd learned that in a leaking room of my own. Commissions from the exoneration were stacked up. A guardsman's sword, a chisel, a lockplate, and I hammered through them, the system ticking soft at the edge of sight. Forge, 51, then Forge, 54. The panel read as the morning wore on, and each number cost me real strength. Yuna watched from the bench, and something in the plain, honest rhythm of it made her stop looking at the floor. She'd been thrown away for a broken spirit. I'd been thrown away for a broken skill. I caught her watching and said, without stopping, "The tower called you spent. The guild called me worthless. Same word, different trade." She went still. "You're still hammering," she said, "so it didn't take." I smiled. "Neither did yours. That's the part they got wrong about both of us." That night, I started on the staff, and I put her hands to it beside mine, because a forge runs on every set of arms it has. She held the joined heartwood while I worked the bind, and I talked her through it. The heat, the grain, why the bind must follow the wood's own line. The work was real, and it cost me, and I let her see it. Her despair, I was learning, could be fuel. Every time she flinched from the fire, I made her look closer. Every time she said, "It's no use," I made her hold something steady. Not from cruelty, but because a mage who still fears a live forge has not been spent. She's been convinced she's spent, and that's a lie you can hammer out. By midnight, the staff stood whole again in shape, a clean bind where the break had been, and the panel ticked past Forge, 56, but the crystal socket gaped empty at its head, and I knew the real work wasn't the wood. It was the thing she'd stopped believing was still alive in her. The next morning, I put the question straight. The tower gave you a coin and a door. I'm giving you a place and a purpose, but it only works if you want it. Walk out and stay spent, or stay and help me make you the mage they said you'd never be again. Yeonwoo and So-ah stood quiet behind me, not pushing. She looked at the two of them. The sword saint with the dead arm, the knight with the cleared name, and she saw what I'd been building here, the thing no one had ever built for her. Then she looked at the whole staff in the empty socket at its crown, and something behind the dull violet of her eyes flickered and caught. "I want to stay," she said, and the words came out like a held breath let go. The panel flared. Women, 3. I stared at the number a long moment. It meant a third broken thing had chosen to stop being broken, and that's the one thing the Forge can't give you. Word that the guildless smith had taken in a cast-out mage moved through the market faster than I liked, and it cut both ways. Some of it was mockery, a spent mage, they said, for the smith who collects broken things. But more of it was coin, because people are drawn to a forge where the discarded keep coming back. The commissions thickened, rep climbed to 58, and money crossed past 15,000 by week's end, enough to start thinking about a real focus for her staff. But the mockery mattered too, because it meant the tower would hear she'd landed somewhere, and the tower does not like to be contradicted. Yuna felt the eyes on her in the market, and shrank from them the way she'd shrank from the fire, and I made her walk through it the same way. "Let them look," I said. "A spent mage doesn't get stared at in the street. A mage the tower's afraid of does." She straightened, slowly, and didn't look away again. Far across the city, in a high chamber above the tower's spiral, an archmage was reading a runner's report and frowning like a man finding a roach in his ledger. The spent girl, it said, had been taken in by a guildless smith, and the smith had 2 other discards at his back. A small thing, but small things grow teeth. The tower's power rests on the lie that a broken mage is gone for good. That spent is the same as dead. If one spent girl could be made whole again, the arithmetic of the tower's authority came apart, and the archmages knew it. So the report was not filed. It was passed down, quiet, to the man with the most to lose. I didn't know any of that yet. I was at the anvil, planning the focus that would cost me more than I'd earned in a season. But the system was patient, and it had been patient with me through worse. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a number was already ticking towards something I couldn't see. The despair didn't leave her all at once. Some nights it came back and sat on her chest, and she'd find me at the coals and ask, in a voice small as a child's, whether I truly believed there was a spark left in her, or whether I was just too stubborn to say the truth. I didn't answer fast, because an easy answer would have been a lie. "I don't know," I said finally. "The system can only count what's really there. It never fabricates skill, and it can't fabricate a spirit either. So we'll find out the same way I find out everything, with real work and real heat, and no one standing over us to say we can't." It was the truest thing I knew how to give her. She looked at the empty socket and then at me, and something settled in her face that hadn't been there before. Not hope, not yet, but the end of the certainty that she was done. That's the first crack in a broken spirit, and it's the one that matters. Everything after it is just forge work. I set the joint staff upright against the wall where the morning light would find it, its socket still empty, and the 3 of them stood looking at it like a promise none quite dared to name. Yeonwoo with her dead arm, Soa with her cleared name, Yuna with her empty socket. 3 broken things, 1 forge. The next thing I needed was a focus worth a mage's spirit, and that would take materials I didn't have and dangers I hadn't met. But for the first time, I had a party, not a collection of strays. 3 women who'd chosen to stay, and a smith who'd learned that reforging people is the only craft that counts. I closed up the forge that night, with the numbers steady in the corner of my eye, and I didn't rest on them, because rest is a luxury the guild never taught me. Forge, 57.women 3, rank B5, rep 58, money plus $15,640. The staff was waiting, the spark was coming, and so was the whole weight of the cower. A mage's staff is nothing without its focus, and a focus is the hardest thing a smith can make, because it isn't shaped, it's grown, like a crystal in the dark. I'd reforged swords, shields, and the bones of broken people, but I'd never grown a focus, and the system was honest about what that meant. A focus made by a smith who doesn't truly know how, the panel read, is just glass. My skill was the ceiling, as always. So before I touched the socket, I spent 3 nights at the bench with scrap crystal and a text Yuna remembered line by line, burning strength and coin until I understood the shape of the thing. What I needed was a heart crystal with a clean lattice, the kind that forms in a mana worm's throat or in the roots of a star oak fed on a ley line for 100 years. Neither was coming to my door. Both would cost blood, and I knew exactly who to call. Gren the broker kept a back office above the monster market that smelled of brine and old hides, and he owed me a favor from the days I'd fixed his hunter's blades for scrap. He heard what I wanted, a clean lattice heart crystal, worm or star oak, and his face did the thing it does when a man prices your desperation. A star oak heart crystal runs 9,000 now, he said, and the worm's gone higher since the last hunt failed. But I know a party going after a mana worm out on the salt flats, and they're short a strong arm. He looked at me over his spectacles. You've got strong arms now, Smith. Want to trade one? It was the old trap in a new coat. The system had warned me that materials are finite, and every one has a price. But a focus doesn't come out of thin air, and Yuna was waiting on it. I told Gren I'd think it over, then went back to lay the danger before my people and let them choose. We took the job, all four of us, because a party that means to grow can't always stay safe. The salt flats ran white to the horizon, and the mana worm's trail cut across them like a rope pulled through sand, a glittering scar where its passing had drawn the light out of the air. I carried a pick and a steady nerve. When it surfaced, the world went loud and wrong. A mana worm is mostly coil and hunger, and it doesn't fight, it floods, pouring pressure into your skull until your ears ring and your hands shake. Yeonwoo went in low with the good arm. Seowa planted the shield as a wall, and Yuna, no mana, just a snapped staff, stayed at my side. I didn't watch the kill so much as feel it through the ground. It cost the hunters 2 men and left the worm cooling in a heap, and Gren's factor was there with a saw before the blood went dark. The heart crystal came out of its throat the size of my fist, milky and shot with light. Back at the forge, I started on the staff itself, because the focus has to sit in a shaft prepared to receive it, and that preparation is the labor nobody sees. I worked the heartwood down, slow and careful, and Yuna held it steady the way she'd learned, and the system took its price, stroke by stroke. Forge 60, then forge 63. The panel ticked, and each number was a night of aching arms and gray edges at the corners of my sight. The shaft had to be true, or the focus would shatter the first time she channeled through it. There is no way to fake truth in wood. You keep the line, or you burn the piece. I burned 2 shafts before I got it right. Yuna watched the first split along a hidden fault and went pale, and I made her watch that too, because this was the part the tower never showed her. Mastery isn't never failing. It's failing and knowing why and doing it again. Seeding a focus is the closest thing to sorcery a smith ever does. I set the heart crystal in the socket and worked the mount around it, and the moment it touched the prepared wood, the air went thick and electric, like a storm trying to remember how to start. The focus wanted a channel, and I was in the way. It nearly took more than I had. Forging always drains me, but this didn't just drain, it emptied, drawing on me the way a well draws water, until my knees hit the stones and Yeonwoo caught my arm to keep me off the floor. For a long second I thought I'd built a beautiful dead thing. Then Yuna stepped forward, because some part of her already knew the answer. A focus channels what's in its mage, and there was still one spark in her, the one that had carried her to my door through the rain. She set her hand on the crystal. The socket caught, and something lit up behind her eyes. The staff lit like a struck bell. Light ran up the heartwood and bloomed at the crystal, soft violet to match her eyes, and the 3 of us reeled back from the heat of it. Yuna stood in the middle of the forge with her hands around the wood, and the dead thing she'd called herself for a season was standing there laughing. The panel flared and held. Forge 68, rank A6. I read the rank line 3 times before I believed it, because the forge had never climbed this fast, and it hadn't climbed on a sword or a shield, but on a staff for a woman the tower threw away. Somewhere in my chest, the worthless smith stood up a little straighter. Yuna pointed the staff at the rain barrel across the yard and whispered something I didn't know, and the water rose up in a smooth silver column and turned to steam against the night. She'd done that with a spark no bigger than a candle flame. A-rank wasn't the ceiling. A-rank was the door. The so what hit before the coals were cool. An A-rank forge in the hands of a guildless smith is not news. It's a declaration, and the market read it that way by noon. Commission bids I'd never dreamed of landed on my bench, and money climbed past $24,000 on a staff I'd nearly killed myself to make. REP 67, the panel read by evening, and the number felt less like a score than a target. Every masterpiece shifts the balance of power, the system had told me, and it never said that gently. A smith who forges an A-rank weapon has announced he can arm someone strong enough to matter. Yuna walked through the market with her new staff, and the crowd parted for her the way it parts for power, and I watched the girl who'd shrank from their eyes the week before hold their gaze without blinking. It should have felt like victory. It felt like the deep breath a man takes before the blow lands. The Forge Guild had been content to starve me while I stayed small. The moment the market said A-rank, that changed. Odron called Boran and the enforcer into his office and shut the door, and the air went the way it goes before a contract is put out, cold, careful, and final. He was a nuisance, Odron said, and I let him be a nuisance because a nuisance dies on its own. But he's forging A-rank steel now, and a guildless smith with an A-rank forge threatens every mark on our door. Boron nodded too fast, the way a man nods when he's afraid. I knew it was coming the way a smith knows a cold front is coming, in the way the pressure of the district changes. The enforcer didn't come to my door that night. He went to my suppliers instead, and one by one, the doors that had finally started to open for me began, quietly, to close. The bottleneck announced itself next morning in the form of a courier who wouldn't meet my eyes. Mardo, the materials merchant, sent word she could no longer sell to me, and the monster parts dealer Gren had introduced me to Regretted, a scheduling conflict that would last until further notice. The guild's network had closed. I had an A-rank forge and no steel to feed it. The focus had cost me a worm hunt's wages and most of my reserves, and now the suppliers were shut, and I understood the fight I'd been in all along with terrible clarity. The guild didn't need to outforge me. It only needed to keep the ore from reaching my door. But A-rank means people watch, and people watching is leverage the guild can't fully strangle. I sat down with my 3 women and laid out the ledger, what we had, what we'd spent, what the guild was cutting off, and asked the only question that matters in a war of attrition. What are we willing to do about it? The answer came back faster than I expected, because these 3 had all been thrown away once, and none meant to be thrown away again. Seo-ah knew the watch's supply routes. Yeonwoo knew the roads. Yuna knew what the guild's marks were worth. Together, we had something the guild hadn't planned for. They think a guildless smith has no supply line, I said, so we'll build one they can't cut. Monster parts, salvage, the leavings nobody else will touch. We did it at the bottom. We can do it at A-rank. The system sat patient at the edge of my sight, less a judge than an ally. I went to bed that night with the numbers steady and the danger louder than it had ever been, and I didn't flinch from either. Forge, 68. Women, 3. Rank, A6. Rep, 67. Money plus $24,810. The guild was coming for us in force, and I meant to be at the anvil when it did. They came to me together at dawn, and I knew from the set of their shoulders before any of them spoke what they were about to ask. S-rank. The 3 of them had climbed out of the dirt on blades I'd forged, and now they wanted the last step. Steel good enough to carry a name the whole city would respect. I didn't answer right away because I knew what S-grade forging would cost me. The system pays for verified craft, and S-grade is the most expensive thing a smith can do. It doesn't drain a man, it empties him. If I forge all 3 of you to S, I said, it may break me. Yeonwoo, who never wasted words, set her dead arm on the bench beside her live one. We didn't climb this far to stop, she said. Forge us, all of us. We'll carry what you can't. And I looked at the 3 of them, Saint, Knight, Mage, and understood this was the moment my whole life had been building toward. I started with Yeonwoo's blade because it was the oldest and the one I knew best. S-grade steel isn't forged in a single heat. It's folded past the point where lesser metal would shatter, each fold driven while the grain is still alive, and the work ate the hours and the strength out of me in long, slow pulls. By the 3rd fold, my hands were shaking, and the panel had climbed to Forge, 72, but the blade wasn't there yet. Yeonwoo held the quench herself, one-handed, and watched the steel go through the colors, Straw, then blood, then the deep blue of a true S-edge, with the still face of a woman afraid to reach for what she wanted. It came out of the final quench and it sang. There's no other word. The blade rang in the air like a struck bell, and Yeonwoo drew it once through the wet wool test and cut the cloth to smoke. She didn't smile. She closed her eyes and stood very still, and I saw the girl the sect threw away finally let go of the last of it. Seo-ah's shield was next, and it cost me more than the blade had, because a shield that must hold against S-rank steel is a different animal. Heavier, truer, far less forgiving of a single rushed rivet. I worked the plates while my back screamed and my sight went gray, and I did not rush, because a shield is a promise kept with someone else's body. Forge, 76. The panel ticked, and I felt the system take its due like a hand reaching into my chest. The shelf behind me was nearly bare. Gren had come through with a last load of monster bone and deep ore at a price that nearly cleaned out our coin. S-grade eats material the way fire eats dry grass. Seo-ah took the finished shield and sword and hefted them, and I watched her settle into them, the way a soldier settles into something that might save her life. It's S-grade, she said, almost to herself. Then, quieter, the watch won't believe it. Harlan won't survive believing it. Yuna's staff came last, and by then I was running on the last of what I had. Refining a focus to S-grade is like tuning a knife's edge while it's in the fire. One wrong breath and the crystal shatters, and there went the worm's heart and half our coin. She held the socket steady and fed it her own spark. The drain nearly put me on the floor. S-grade work costs mana, not just stamina, and I'm no mage, so it took from me the one thing I couldn't spare, the strength to keep standing. Yeonwoo caught my arm before my knees went, and I stayed up through the last of it, because the panel had reached Forge, 80, and it was not done with me. The staff lit when the mount closed, violet running up the heartwood like slow lightning, and Yuna held it aloft with a face full of something I'd never seen there. Not despair, not doubt, but the clean, bright fearlessness of a woman who has looked at the thing that broke her and decided to break it back. S-rank isn't a title you're given. It's a thing you prove in front of witnesses, against something that can kill you. Gren arranged it, a ranking beast out of the deep warrens, a horned horror the city had been paying to avoid for a decade, and half the district turned out to watch 3 discarded women try the impossible. I didn't fight. I stood at the rail with my hammer and watched my work go to war. Yeonwoo's blade cut hide where a dozen lesser swords had failed. Seo-ah's shield turned a charge that would have broken a wall. Yuna's staff tore a hole in the night and filled it with violet fire. One by one, my forges answered. The beast fell, and the city went silent, the way a city does when it realizes it's just watched 3 women it threw away stand where its own champions couldn't. And in that silence, the panel flared, and the number I'd been chasing since a leaking back room finally came to rest. Rank S7, Forge 82. I read the line and didn't trust my eyes, so I read it again, and it held. The 3 broken women the world had discarded were standing at S-rank, and I had forged every blade, every shield, every staff that carried them there. The worthless blacksmith had built the strongest party in the city. I won't pretend it didn't hit me. 12 years of the guild telling me I was nothing, and now the market was saying a name I'd never thought to hear attached to mine. But the system's oldest lesson stood behind the triumph, patient as ever. Every masterpiece shifts the balance of power, and power does not let that pass unanswered. The crowd didn't cheer, they stared, the way people stare at a fire they didn't start and can't predict. And at the back of the yard, I caught a runner turning away with the news in his coat, heading, I knew without being told, for the one building where S-rank steel would be received as a declaration of war. The so what of S-rank arrived before the smoke cleared. Commissions came in that afternoon that would have fed us for a year. Money crossed past 38,000, and rep climbed to 76, and for the first time in my life, I had more offers than hands. It should have felt like winning. It felt like a hilltop in a storm. Because S-rank is a target with a name on it. A guildless smith who can arm 3 S-rank women isn't a nuisance anymore. He's a power that threatens every mark the guild has sold, every noble's monopoly on who gets to be strong. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, on purpose, and I didn't regret it. That night, I let the 3 of them eat and rest and be young for once. and I sat at the anvil with the coals going out and counted the cost the way I'd been taught. The shelves were empty, my body was a hollow thing, and the guild, I knew, would not let S-Rank stand. Odron didn't even raise his voice, the way he hadn't the day he'd thrown me out 12 years ago. S-Rank, he said to the enforcer, and the word sat in the room like a dropped blade. The worthless smith has built an S-Rank party in my city. Do you understand what that makes us? The guild that couldn't stop him? The retaliation was ordered the way the guild orders everything. Quiet and total. No more starving me at the edges. They'd come at the suppliers with the enforcer's name attached, buy the watch's silence with coin, and send the brute work to break the forge itself. Boran would carry the word. The enforcer would carry the blade. I'd expected it, but expecting a blow and taking it are different things. When the first of my commissions was withdrawn by a nervous merchant who'd been leaned on, and the second and the third, I understood this wasn't going to be a fight about steel. It was a war about whether a guildless smith was allowed to exist at all. Two walls were closing on me at once, and I could feel both. The materials were gone. S-grade had eaten the last of the ore and monster bone, and now the suppliers were shut, and Gren himself was warning me he'd been spoken to. And my body was a debt I couldn't repay. The strength poured into 3 forges gone into a hollow I couldn't refill. The system had warned me of this on the first night, and I'd nodded like I understood. I hadn't. Rationing isn't a strategy when you're empty. It's arithmetic. A smith with no ore and no strength forges nothing, no matter how high his rank. The title of S-Rank Smith was worth exactly what it could do next, and right now, that was nothing. But the 3 of them closed around me and didn't let the hollow stay empty. Seoa knew where the watch dumped its broken steel. Yeonwoo knew the roads the guild couldn't watch. Yuna could make a coin talk. We weren't a smith and 3 women anymore. We were a party, and a party cornered is dangerous. We spent that night over a map of the district, and for the first time, the 4 of us planned like a unit. The guild would come in force. Odron would send the enforcer and half the marks he could buy, and the noble arms dealers would be right behind them. We counted their numbers and ours, and the math was ugly. We're outgunned, Seoa said flatly, and outsupplied, and they know both. She wasn't wrong, but Yuna set a finger on the map and said, quiet. We're also the only S-rank party in the city with nothing left to lose. And that, it turned out, was a kind of weapon too, the one the guild never loaned to forge. I banked the coals and looked at the 3 of them, and I knew the war was already on us. Forge, 82, women, 3, rank, S7, rep, 76, money, plus $38,570. The numbers were the best I'd ever had, and they meant nothing against what was coming. But we'd been thrown away once. We weren't going quietly this time. The war came to my door the way I'd known it would. Not with a single blade, but with a district going quiet around me. The guild's runners were in the street before sunrise, and one by one, the stalls that had started to trade with me pulled their shutters down. The district smelled like a siege, and the siege was me. Odron didn't come alone this time. He'd brought the noble arms dealer, a man called Lord Valen, because an S-rank smith who forges his own steel doesn't just threaten the guild's marks, he threatens Valen's whole monopoly on who gets to be armed in this city. 2 enemies who'd circled each other for years had found one enemy to share. I stood in my doorway and watched them move their pieces, and I didn't feel the fear I'd expected. I felt something older and colder, the thing a smith feels when he sees the whole weight of a city's money and law lining up to break what he built. Forge, 82. Women, 3. Rank, S7. They meant to take all of it. The first blow was the one I'd expected since the guild first learned my name. Supply. Valen owned the ore contracts and half the river trade, and between him and Odron, every source I'd scraped together went dark in a single afternoon. No ore, no salvage. A smith without material is a man with a hammer and a memory. We counted what was left, and the math was brutal. Seoa spread it on the bench, enough deep ore for a handful of blades, a stack of broken watch steel, and the last of the monster bone, and looked at me with the flat eyes of a soldier who'd done this before. Outsupplied, she said. They just have to wait. But they wouldn't wait, because waiting lets a legend grow, and they knew it. So while we rationed, they'd come. I looked at the three of them and said the thing none of us wanted to say first. We weren't going to win this on steel. We were going to have to outlast the people trying to starve us. And outlast is a word you earn. They came that night, the enforcer at the head of a crew of guild-bought muscle, and they didn't hide it, because a guild doesn't hide what it can buy off. Torches in the lane, iron in their hands, and the enforcer's voice carrying up the street. The forge was forfeit, and anyone inside would leave through the guild or not at all. I barred the door and put my hand on my hammer, and for one cold second I thought it would be me alone in the dark, with nothing but a tool. Then the three of them stepped up beside me, Yeon-woo drawing her S-blade with the good arm, So-ah setting her shield, Yuna's staff already humming low with the light I'd forged into it. The enforcer kicked the door in metal wall that didn't move, because So-ah's shield had been forged to hold against S-rank steel, and a guild thug's boot is not S-rank steel. He hit it once, twice, and the third time he understood he wasn't breaking in. He was being held out, and the street went quiet in a new, uncertain way. While they held the door, I worked. A smith in a war is a smith still, and the forge was the only edge we had that they couldn't buy. I reforged the broken watch steel into barricade spikes, edged the shutters, and hammered a dozen quick, ugly weapons that would still cut better than anything the enforcer's crew carried. Forge, 86, the panel ticked, and then Forge, 89, and each number was bought with the last of my strength and the last of our ore. The system took its due, but it gave back too. Every piece I forged under that roof held when it mattered, because it was real work, and real work doesn't know how to break on the night you need it. The fight outside ebbed and surged, and through it all, I kept the coals hot and the hammer true, because I'd learned the system's first lesson in a leaking back room, and it had never once failed me. You don't win a war with what you hope. You win it with what you forge, one honest stroke at a time. The counterstroke came to me in the small hours, not as a flash, but as a shape I'd been walking around all night. The enforcer's crew weren't fighting us. They were fighting the idea of us, and the thing that made them brave was the guild's certainty behind them. Break the certainty, and you break the crew. So I forged it, a single blade, S-grade, from the very last of the deep ore, and I didn't make it for any of my women. I made it for the enforcer to see. I carried it to the door and held it up in the torchlight so the whole lane could see what a guildless smith could make while they hammered at his walls, and the crew stopped. Forge, 93, the panel read, and the number mattered less than the silence that fell over the street. Fear travels faster than torchlight, and the men Odron had bought were suddenly aware they'd been sent to break a man who could arm 3 S-rank women and still outforge their whole guild. The first of them stepped back. The enforcer didn't step back, because that wasn't what the guild paid him for. He came up the lane alone, big and patient, and the crew he'd brought parted for him like water. "Nice blade," he said, and he meant it, and that made it worse. But a blade's only as good as the man behind it, and the guild sent me because I'm better. I didn't take the bait, and neither did the women, because we'd fought enough by then to know what he was doing. So-ah moved to the front with her shield. Yeon-woo flanked, and Yuna's staff came up glowing behind them, and the 4 of us made a wall of the thing the guild had spent 12 years telling me I'd never have. He hesitated. He came anyway, because a man like that only knows how to go forward. It happened fast. A charge, a shield that held, a violet light and a sword saint's edge, and one sound I'll remember the rest of my life. The enforcer went down hard, and the crew went over him into the dark and didn't come back. By first light, the district was talking, and the talk had teeth. A guildless smith and 3 discarded women had turned back the guild's enforcer in the street, and the men Audron had sent to break them had run. REP climbed to 83 before the sun was fully up, and the number felt different now. Less like a score, more like a flag. The "so what" came with the shutters. Merchants who'd bolted their doors were cracking them open again, and a few brave ones brought their broken tools and their coin, because a man who stands when the whole guild comes down on him is worth trusting. The commissions came back, and the ledger began to turn. I knew it wasn't over. A guild doesn't lose a war because it loses one lane. But something had shifted in the street, and I could feel it the way I feel a blade's temper come true under the hammer. They'd tried to make an example of us. Instead, they'd made a legend, and legends are very hard to starve. Across the city, Lord Valen was reading the same news from a very different angle. The arms dealer wasn't a brute like the enforcer. He was a man who thought in supply and demand, and what he saw in the night's work was that the guild's muscle had failed. "You sent a hammer to break an anvil," he told Odron. "Amateurs." Valen didn't raise a blade. He raised the price of everything. Ore, coal, river freight, the quiet permissions that let a forge even exist inside the walls. He owned or influenced them all, and by noon, the squeeze that had been about muscle became about money. If the smith wanted steel, he'd pay triple. If he couldn't pay, he'd starve. But Valen's arithmetic had a hole, and I found it the way a smith finds any flaw, by leaning on it. War makes everyone desperate, and desperate men pay premium for steel that holds. The commissions kept climbing. Money crossed past 54,000, and the man who tried to starve me made my work the only work worth buying. The cost caught up with me that night, the way it always does when a man spends more than he has. My hands had stopped shaking during the fighting, and now they wouldn't stop, and the hollow the S-grade forges had opened in me had been dug deeper by every piece I'd hammered under the torchlight. I sagged against the bench and the room tilted. They caught me before I hit the floor. Seoa's arm, Yeonwoo's steadying hand, Yuna's voice sharp with worry, and they lowered me down like something they weren't willing to lose. It should have shamed me, needing to be held up by the people I was forging into a legend. Instead, it told me, clearer than any panel, what I'd actually built. "You don't get to burn out," Yuna said, and there was iron in it, the kind I'd spent a season trying to put back into her. "You're the forge. If you go down, we all go down." I wanted to argue that a forge can't rest in a war, but she was right, and lying to my own people in the middle of a war was the one thing I refused to do. We held the district through the next day and the day after, and it didn't feel like winning so much as refusing to lose. Valen kept the prices high, and Odrin kept the muscle moving, and we kept answering with the only thing they couldn't take, steel that held, and 3 women who decided the world didn't get to throw them away twice. I looked at the 3 of them in the dusklight and understood that this was my life turning over. The guild had thrown me out for being worthless, and I'd come back with an S-rank party and a forge that wouldn't die. Outgunned, outsupplied, still standing. It wasn't victory, it was the shape of victory. But a war is only ever one more battle until it's won, and I could feel the next one forming past the district's edge, where Valen's money and the guild's marks were all turning toward the smith who'd refused to disappear. Forge, 97. Women, 3. Rank, S7. Rep, 83. Money, plus $54,920. We were still here, and we weren't done. The guild's war had scorched the timbers over my door and emptied our shelves, but it hadn't broken us. I counted what survived: 3 women breathing, a charred hammer, and a panel ticking patient orange. Forge, 97. It felt like a number waiting for the next blow. They came to me before the coals were warm, the way they always do when the fight isn't finished. S-rank held, Yeonwoo said, setting her dead arm on the bench. SS is the rank that makes them come with everything. She was right. I just didn't want to say it. Seoa folded her arms and Yuna stood close, staff glowing faint. "We climb or we run," Seoa said. "No door stays shut for a guildless smith at S-rank." I looked at them and felt the weight settle. SS wasn't a step, it was a line, and crossing it would cost us everything. I started the SS grade work the only way I know: slow, honest, and punishing. The system showed me the steel's grain not as a gift, but as a shape to earn with my hands. Fold after fold, heat after heat, each pass drained me deeper than S-grade ever had. The ceiling had moved higher than I'd feared. Forge, 99, then Forge, 103. The panel ticked as the night ground on, and every number came out of my own body. My arms shook by the 4th fold, and Yeonwoo braced the stock while I struck, her good hand steady where mine failed. That's what the system means by a ceiling. It just makes you bleed. But the steel was coming right. I could feel it in the ring of the hammer, the true note that says the grain is straight and the temper will hold. SS grade isn't a secret alloy. It's the same steel, worked past where any lesser smith would have quit. I didn't quit. Between heats, I watched them drill, and it steadied me the way cold water steadies hot steel. Yeonwoo moved like a blade with a mind of its own, her shattered arm bound close. So-ah planted her great shield, and the yard shook, and Yuna, soft where the others were hard, made the air itself flinch. They'd stopped being three broken women I'd taken in and become a party, a found family with steel in its bones. Yeonwoo corrected Yuna's stance with a nudge of her foot. So-ah caught her when the dead arm threw her balance. Yuna laughed until the night laughed back. I'd forged their weapons. They'd forged each other. That's the part the guild never understood. It wasn't the steel that made them strong. It was that none of them would let the others fall back into the dark they'd crawled out of. SS-Rank wasn't a number we were chasing. It was the place these three had already decided they belonged. Lord Valen came at noon in a carriage with silver on the traces, and he didn't bother with the pretense of a customer. A big man, soft in the face and hard in the eyes, wearing his arms trade like a coat he'd owned for years. "The worthless smith," he said, and smiled. "I've come to see if it's still true." He didn't wait to be asked in. He walked my forge the way a buyer walks a horse market, and I knew what he was before he said a word. Valen owned the city's arms trade, the ore, the smithies, the guild's charter. An S-rank forge outside his ledgers was a leak he couldn't stand. He'd come to buy me. 50,000, he said, and named it like a kindness. For your mark, your forge, and your three women under my banner. You'll want for nothing, Smith. The three of them went still behind me, and I felt the insult settle like a bad heat. Not partnership, a leash with a gold buckle. I told him no, and I said it plain, the way a man sets a hot piece down so there's no mistaking where it lands. My mark isn't for sale, my forge isn't yours, and the women are not stock. Valen's smile didn't waver, but the warmth went out of it the way warmth leaves a rune in winter. Then you'll learn the cost of a mark outside the ledgers, he said, no louder than Odron had 12 years ago. S-rank was a nuisance. Push for SS, and I'll stop buying your silence and start buying the hands that take it from you. He paused at the threshold. The offer won't stand forever. The carriage rolled away, and the so what settled over us like smoke. Valen hadn't come to bargain. He'd come to mark the line, and I'd just stepped across it in front of my people. Seoa's jaw was set, Yeonwoo's good hand on her hilt. He'll move open now, she said. No more quiet. I forged through the night like a man outrunning something, because I was. The SS blade came out of the final quench with a hiss that filled the room with steam, and I knew before I tested it. The weight, the balance, the true line of the edge. I drew it down wet wool, and it cut clean, end to end. The panel flared and held, and I read it twice before I trusted it. Forge, 114, rank SS8. The forge had crossed the line the guild and the arms dealer both warned me not to cross, and I'd crossed it with my own two hands. The man Odron had thrown away stood up and stayed standing. Yeonwoo lifted the blade, and even she, who'd held 1,000 edges, went still at the feel of it. This will cut what the S-blade couldn't, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not pride, certainty. For one clean moment, before the city woke, we breathed. The so what of SS-rank hit before the sun was fully up. Runners scattered from my door like sparks from a struck anvil, and by mid-morning, every merchant knew a guildless smith had forged SS-grade steel. REP climbed to 89, and money crossed past 76,000 on commissions that arrived faster than I could refuse. But Valen had meant what he said. By noon, his men were at the supply gates and the watch house corners, buying silence and route maps with a purse that never emptied. Marta sent word she'd been leaned on again, harder. Gren came after dark and said, low, that the arms dealer was buying every load of ore in the district. I'd expected the blow. Taking it was different. Every commission that landed was a contract the guild didn't hold, and every contract was a wound to Valen's ledgers. An SS forge wasn't a rival anymore. It was a competing power, and powers don't coexist in this city. That evening, in a parlor above the city, Lord Valen and Guildmaster Odrin sat over wine and stopped pretending they were enemies. I heard it later from a maid who'd served the cups, but I could picture it clear. Odrin's thin, patient smile, and Valen's money laid out between them like a weapon. He was a nuisance I should have strangled at the door, Odron said, and the regret in it was real. I starved him, I leaned on his suppliers, I sent the enforcer. The man simply refuses to stay worthless. He meant it as a curse, and it came out like the only honest thing said all evening. Thorin stood by the wall, nodding at nothing, the way a man nods when he's been promoted into a fight he didn't ask for. The two settled terms like men settle a ledger. The guild would bring muscle and marks, Valen the coin and the watch. I didn't know the words yet. I knew the shape. The walls closed again, but this time we'd seen them coming. The shelves were bare. SS Grade had eaten the last of the ore in monster bone, and Valen's men had bought up what the guild hadn't choked off. A smith with no material is just a man with a hammer, and I said it out loud. But the three of them closed around the problem the way they'd closed around me a dozen times before. The watch dumps its broken steel off the river gate, Seok-ho said. The monster market still runs under the bridge, and Gren owes us. Yuna was already marking routes on the wall. Valen can't buy what he can't find. We weren't a smith and three women anymore. We were a party with a supply line the guild couldn't strangle because it didn't run through their ledgers. Salvage and monster parts and the leavings of a city that had thrown us all away once. The SS Forge would have its steel. It would just bleed for it. I banked the coals that night and stood with the three of them in the doorway, watching the district light its lamps. Forge 114, women 3, rank SS-8, rep 89, money plus $76,340. The best numbers I'd ever carried, and they'd painted a target big enough for the whole city to aim at. Valen would come with everything, and the guild behind him, and I didn't flinch because flinching was a luxury the Forge had never afforded me. But something else was moving now, something I could feel the way you feel a storm before the clouds show. SS-Rank wasn't just a threat, it made a kingdom take a long, slow look. I didn't know it yet, but in a high room far across the city, a man who graded champions for a king was already turning the page on our names. The war with the guild was almost over, and we were about to learn it had never been the real war at all. SS-Rank wasn't the top. It was a bigger board. There are ranks, and then there is SSS. The gap between SS and SSS isn't a step, it's a chasm, spoken of in the hushed voice reserved for legend. I stood in my cold forge at dawn, the SS blade on the wall and three women watching, and I knew they wouldn't let it go uncrossed. SS makes them afraid, Yeonwoo said, but SSS makes them kneel. That's the only rank that ends a war instead of starting one. Her dead arm hung at her side, but there was nothing dead in the way she said it. Seok-ho nodded once, and Yuna's staff threw violet light across the stone. I wanted to tell them it might break me. The system takes its due from every forge, and SSS grade would take more than I'd ever given one piece of steel. But I looked at the three of them, sword-saint, knight, mage, and the words died. They'd carried me this far on blades I'd forged. I wouldn't stop now. The SSS work began the way all great work begins, with me at the bottom of what I knew, looking up. The system showed me the steel's shape in patient orange, and for the first time, it showed a shape I couldn't fully read. The grain ran deeper than SS, the temper line finer than anything I'd held. So I learned it the way I'd learned everything, slow and bleeding. Forge 117, then Forge 121. The panel ticked as the days ground together, and every number was paid out of my body. Yeonwoo braced, So-ah worked the bellows, Yuno fed the coals, and the four of us carried what none could alone. The steel fought me at every fold. 3 pieces shattered in the quench before I read the fault, the angle of the fold, the beat I'd rushed. I didn't rage, I studied. The difference between SS and SSS wasn't strength or luck. It was failing until the failure taught you what you'd been missing. Somewhere in those grinding days, the found family finished becoming. Yuna rebraided Yeonwoo's hair. Soa oiled her harness because the dead arm couldn't reach it. Yeonwoo taught Yuna to hold a blade in case the staff is not enough. Strangers thrown together by my forge. Now sisters. They were also, in their different ways, the most striking women I'd ever stood beside, and I'd stopped pretending not to notice. Yeonwoo moved with a fighter's economy, but held a softness the sword life hadn't worn off. Seoa was built like a war. Yuna, willowy and full-figured, burned brighter every day. I didn't let myself linger on it. There was steel to forge and a war coming, and a smith who divides his heart mid-heat ruins the blade. But the truth sat in the firelight. I'd set out to reforge 3 broken weapons, and somewhere along the line, I'd been reforged too. The worthless smith had a family now. Sir Aldrich, the king's master of arms, did not move the way other men move. He read the report by lamplight in a high chamber and didn't frown or curse. He set it aside and looked at the wall the way a man looks at a blade he's about to test. A guildless smith, 3 discarded women at SS-Rank. The master of arms graded champions for a king, and 30 years had taught him the only honest measure of a weapon is what it does in the hand that carries it. The report didn't tell him the smith was worthless. It told him something the guild never once considered, that the smith might be real. He sent for the proving records, then the watch's reports on the war, and the more he read, the stiller he went. A smith forging SS-grade steel outside the guild's charter was either a fraud or the rarest thing in a generation. He wrote one line on a slip of royal paper, sealed it, and sent it toward my door. The courier came 3 days later, and I knew what he was at once. He wore the king's colors, a different animal. He held out the sealed slip, and the forge went still. Sir Aldrich, master of arms to the crown, requests the smith at the next proving to grade the women. I read the words and felt the ground shift. The guild I could fight, Valen I could refuse, but the crown's master of arms grading my women wasn't a threat, it was a question, and my answer would decide if the kingdom saw a weapon or a wound. Requests, I said. The king's men don't request. The 3 of them looked at me, and I looked at the slip in my hand, and I understood what the so what of SS-Rank had finally become. It wasn't materials, or the guild, or a noble's purse. It was the throne itself, turning its slow head our way. I'd pushed for rank to survive, and now rank made us visible. We went to the proving the way soldiers go to a battle they've chosen. Sir Aldrich stood at the rail, lean and gray and unreadable, and he didn't cheer or sneer. He watched the way a man watches a blade edge catch light. The 3 women took the field, and I let my work speak. They gave him everything. Yanwu's SS blade cut the dummy's plate like wet parchment. Seoa's shield turned a warhammer that would have broken a lesser wall. Yuna's staff climbed the dusk and violet and called down fire that stole men's breath. 3 discarded women, standing where a king's champion never had. The panel flared as the last fire died, and I read it through the smoke. Forge, 133. Rank, SSS-9. The 3 broken women the world threw away had reached the rank that ends wars, before the king's own master of arms. Aldrich nodded once, and I knew we'd crossed onto the board that mattered. The so what of SSS-Rank moved through the city like a change in the weather. REP climbed to 94 by nightfall, and money crossed past 104,000 on a single proving, because the king's master of arms had nodded and every noble wanted what he'd stamped. But the money was the smallest part. A guildless smith at SS-Rank is a rival to be crushed. At SSS-Rank, graded by the crown's own man, he's a fact the guild has to live with, and Valen's ledger had a hole in it the size of a kingdom. Power had noticed us, and power is the most expensive master. Aldrich came to me after the field cleared, and offered no coin, charter, or handshake. You forge steel the realm can't afford to lose, he said, flat and final. That makes you useful. Useful men are watched. Watched men make enemies of everyone who liked them invisible. The warning was the real prize. The news reached the guild the way bad news always does, fast and from 3 mouths at once. The worthless smith, they said, had gone SSS, and the king's master of arms had been there to see it. Odron sat very still behind his desk, and for the first time in 12 years, the thin smile didn't come. He was supposed to stop, Odron said, to no one, the words coming out like a man discovering a wall where he'd assumed a door. S-Rank was a nuisance. SS was a problem. SSS is the crown's business now, and that's not something I can strangle at the supply gate. He was right, and it was killing him. Boran stood by the wall, gray as the stone, and the enforcer waited with the patience of a blade, told it might not be needed. The guild had built its authority on the word worthless, and now that word was being erased before the city. I wasn't there to see it, but I'd waited 12 years for that silence. The new bottleneck announced itself without a knock. It wasn't materials anymore. The crown's attention had opened doors the guild couldn't shut, and ore and monster bone were moving again. It was something thinner and harder to forge than any steel. It was politics, and I'd never been any good at it. The crown grades you, the nobles court you, and every faction wants a piece of the SSS forge, Seok-ho said. That's not protection, Seok-ho. That's a war with better manners. One wrong mark for the wrong lord, and the throne decides you're a weapon it can't aim. I'd spent my life believing honest work was enough, and the forge kept proving it could be. But the realm pays for loyalty, allegiance, and choosing which master not to offend. I'd refused the guild and the arms dealer. Refusing the crown was different, and we all knew it. The steel wasn't the question anymore. I stood in the doorway that night with the three of them and watched the city spread below us. Bigger than a month ago, the way a board looks bigger once you learn how many hands are playing. Forge, 133. Women, 3. Rank, SSS-9. Rep, 94. Money, plus $104,800. The number said we'd won. The city said otherwise. The guild and Valen were still there, and now the crown had us in its ledger. I didn't know what came next, but I knew it would be decided in rooms I'd never been invited to, by men who'd never swung a hammer. The forge could carry us to SSS-Rank. It couldn't carry us through a council of lords. Yan Wu touched my arm. The first time I'd felt her dead hand move in weeks. A tremor, a ghost of the girl she'd been, a promise of what SSS-Rank might yet pull out of all three. Whatever room they put you in, she said quietly, you won't walk in alone. I looked at them and believed her. The council's seal came to my door with 3 men behind it, and knew what it meant before I broke the wax. When the crown grades a guildless smith at SSS-Rank, the great houses can't ignore him, so they invite him to a council where every other seat already knows its answer. The Council of the District, Yan Wu read over my shoulder, requests the presence of the smith Jin Seok-ho to settle the matter of his charter. She said settle the way another woman would say sentence. The guild had kept me out of that room 12 years, and now the room demanded I come in. Seok-ho was already laying out the angles the way she laid out a battlefield. They'll offer you a charter with conditions or brand you an outlaw with witnesses. Either way, the room is the weapon. Yuna stood close, and I felt them brace behind me. I'd spent 12 years told I didn't belong. The word that the council had summoned me brought the discards to my door. By noon, a crowd filled the lane. Guildless smiths, outcast fighters, the broken and thrown away who'd been watching me climb. They didn't come for steel. They came asking if one of them was finally being let in. I looked out and saw my own face in every one of them, 12 years back and still raw. An old tanner whose guild sold his lease. A one-armed porter turned off the docks. 3 apprentices Boran had fired for being slow. They weren't an army. They were a mirror, held up to the room about to decide my name. It wasn't just the women anymore, and the system felt it. Women stayed 3, never a number to grow, just the 3 who'd chosen me and each other. But the rally told me what I'd been too busy forging to see. I wasn't climbing for myself anymore. A city of discards was waiting on me. I kept forging through the days before the council, because the forge was the only room where I knew the answer, and the work the only thing that settled me. The commissions had thickened past anything I'd seen, and I worked through them the slow, honest way, as forge climbed past 140. The drain was real, and it never let me forget the price. SSS grade work takes from a man the way the guild took from the district, a little every day, until there's nothing left. I rationed myself. Forge, rest, forge again, and let the 3 of them cover the hours I couldn't stand. They made it look easy, but I was learning too, at the cost of my own hands. Each commission taught me a fault I'd been missing, and each fault closed more of the gap the guild had thrown me out for. Forge, 143, then Forge, 147, and the ceiling I'd thought was the end of me kept inching upward, patient as the coals. The 3 of them grew into the rally in ways I couldn't have taught. Yan Wu drilled the outcast fighters, and they listened like raw steel under a master's hammer, because she'd been thrown away hardest and come back whole enough to stand at SSS. Seok-ho organized the lane, feeding 40 hungry discards. And Yuna, my broken mage, surprised me most of all. She sat up at the bench and took the measure of every discard, a word and a light touch that told them the tower's word spent was a lie they'd been sold, the way worthless had been sold to me. The girl who'd shrank from a market crowd was now the warmest thing in the room. I watched them work and understood what the forge had built. Not 3 weapons and a smith, a family with room for anyone the city had thrown away. And the 3 of them, Yeonwoo's grace, So-ah's care, Yuna's warmth, were its beating heart. I'd set out to reforge broken women. I'd reforged a corner of the world. The council hall was colder than the forge had ever been, and I walked in with 3 women at my back and 40 discards worth of hope on my shoulders. They sat me at the foot of a long table, the guild and great houses arranged like stones in a wall. Odron was there, and Valen, and a dozen faces, a problem they hadn't priced. The smith Jin Seok-ho, the chair began, and read my record the way a man reads a list of charges. Expelled, ungraded, no charter, no mark, and yet somehow SSS. He let the somehow hang in the air, because the whole room wanted an answer that put me back in the box they'd built 12 years ago. I didn't give them the answer. I set a blade on the table instead, a simple one, forged clean, the kind I'd made 100 of, and let it speak. Graded, I said. 12 years you told me I was worthless. Grade the blade and tell me if it lies. The room went still, and the guild's wall cracked. They passed the blade around the table, and I watched their faces change the way metal changes in the quench. Slow, then all at once. It wasn't an SSS masterpiece. It was an honest blade, exactly what the guild had spent 12 years saying I couldn't make. One by one, they stopped seeing a problem and started seeing a fact. The chair cleared his throat, and the sentence that came out wasn't the one they'd written. The council of the district recognizes the forge of Jin Seok-ho, he said, and the words landed on Odron like a brand. The panel flared. Forge, 152. Rep, 98. The worthless smith had a mark now, hammered out of them. Odron sat gray and silent, and Valen's soft face had gone hard as a banker's ledger, and neither said a word. The guild had thrown me out, and the city had buried me, and now the same city was forced to write my name where it had to be read. It wasn't victory, but it was recognition, and I'd earned every syllable. The trap sprang the moment the formal words were done. Recognition wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the politics, and the great houses closed in as I'd been warned. One lord wanted an exclusive mark on my steel. Another wanted my women, seconded to his guard. Each offer was a leash wrapped in a smile. Sir Aldrich stood against the far wall through all of it, watching as he'd watched the proving, and he didn't lift a finger to help or hinder. I understood him then. The crown's man didn't want my forge tied to any house. He wanted it strong, unattached, and useful, and he was letting the wolves test whether I could keep it that way. I refused them all, one after another, the way I'd refused Valen, plainly, so there was no mistaking the line. Some smiles stayed, some didn't, and by the time the last lord turned away, I'd learned what the forge never taught me. In a room of powerful men, every refusal is a debt someone means to collect. Word of the recognition hit the lane before I did, and the crowd had doubled by the time we walked back. The discards came to see the man who'd walked into the room and out with a mark, and they brought what they had: a broken sword, a bag of scrap, a hand to carry water. None of it was much. All of it mattered. More rallied every hour, and I let them come, because the forge had always been where the thrown away found their feet. Not new women. The 3 were my family, but smiths, fighters, the lost, waiting for proof the bottom could climb. They weren't my army. They were my answer to the council's politics. The politics was the bottleneck now, as materials had been before, and the rally was my only lever. A guildless smith can be crushed. A smith with 40 discards at his door is a movement, and movements are harder to strangle than any forge. I looked at the crowd and, for the first time, wasn't afraid. The money kept climbing the way it always does when the city finally admits you exist. Money crossed past 151,000 on the recognition and the commissions that followed, and rep settled at 98, one heartbeat from the round hundred that had felt impossible a month ago.
Because the politics didn't stop at the council doors.
The lords I'd refused went to work quietly, at the edges. A commission would arrive with a seal I didn't want. A supplier would suddenly be reserved for the houses. A rumor would surface that the SSS forge was cursed or bought. All of it reached my door.
Seo-ah called it what it was.
They can't outforge you and can't outfight us, so they'll outpolitic you. Starve the name, smear the mark, tie the forge up in charter law until you drown in paper. She was right, and I hated it, because it was a war I couldn't win at the anvil. But politics was just another material.
I banked the coals that night
and sat with the three of them, and we let the day's weight settle like a coat. Forge, 152. Women, 3. Rank, SSS-9. Rep, 98. Money, plus $151,300. The strongest numbers I'd ever carried, and I could feel the storm gathering beyond them like a pressure drop before rain. The guild wouldn't take the recognition lying down, and neither would Valen, and the council's politics was already grinding toward what came next. Odron had built his life on the word worthless, and I just hammered it out of the city's mouth in front of him. Men like Odron don't step down. They make one last throw.
Yunwoo laid her good hand over her dead one,
and the two of them, the hand that could still swing and the one learning to again, looked like a promise I was going to need. Whatever he throws, she said quietly, it breaks on us. I looked at my sword saint, my knight, my mage, and I believed it.
Guildmaster Odron made his last throw with
everything he had left. I heard its shape before its words. He called in every mark the guild had sold, leaned on every district debt, and put the enforcer's name at the bottom of a contract bearing my forge's address.
He didn't come at my steel, or my supplies, or my women.
He came at the one thing recognition had given me, and I couldn't forge my way out of, my name. The enforcer carried a writ saying the SSS forge was built on stolen technique and stock, and I'd been expelled for exactly what the word meant.
It was a clever blow,
and I'd be lying if I said it didn't land. Recognition can be revoked by the room that granted it, and a charter on a false mark is just paper. Odron didn't need to beat me. He only needed the city to remember what it had called me for 12 years.
I didn't answer the writ with words.
I answered it the only way I'd ever answered anything, with the forge and the hardest piece I'd ever set out to make. A blade for the record, not for sale, forged before witnesses from scrap the guild itself had thrown back. Proof no writ could unmake.
The work was the cruelest I'd done, and I did it anyway.
Forge, 157, then Forge, 164. The panel ticked as the days ground past, and every number was drawn out of my body. Yunwoo braced, Soa held the heat, Yuna fed the flame, and we bent the steel into the shape of 12 years of being told I couldn't.
When it came out of the file quench,
I knew it was the best thing I'd ever made. Not the biggest, not the deadliest, the truest. A blade with no flaw a guildmaster could point to, no grain a lifetime of lies could undo. I set it on the bench and looked at the three of them. I was about to testify.
The night before the reckoning,
the three of them sat with me in the forge, and for a long time none of us spoke. Yunwoo's dead arm was moving now, enough that she'd lifted a cup that week with the hand the sect had shattered, and she set that hand between us like a flag planted on ground everyone said was lost.
Seo-ah had stopped carrying the weight of the crime
she'd been framed for. She sat easy now, like a soldier who's let a long war end. And Yuna, my spent mage, was the brightest thing in the room, soft and full-figured and laughing, her violet eyes alight with a spark the tower had sworn was gone. I looked at them and felt the years peel back to the leaking room where I'd sat alone with 8,420 silver of debt and a pile of rejected scrap. That man had never imagined this. A family, a forge, a mark the city spoke with respect. I'd set out to reforge the discards, and they'd reforged me.
The council hall was fuller than it had ever been,
and the writ was read in Odron's own voice, and for one terrible moment, I felt the room turning back toward the old word, worthless. Then I set the blade before the chair. It's built from your own scrap, I said. Grade it, or admit the writ is a lie. They graded it. They had to, with Sir Aldrich watching from the wall. And the blade, my last, truest blade, graded clean past anything the guild's masters had ever turned out. The room went quiet, the way a crowd goes quiet when a long-held thing snaps. Odrin's writ had become the rope, and he tied it himself.
The guildmaster fell the way men like him always fall.
Not with a shout, but with the slow, terrible certainty that the word he'd built his life on had turned on him. The council revoked nothing. It revoked the writ instead, and before the whole city, the man who'd thrown me out 12 years ago was stripped of his mark.
The chair's gavel came down. The room exhaled, and the panel flared so bright I could read it through the shouting. The recognition didn't just stand, it hardened. Every house that had watched the blade now wanted its name tied to the forge that made it. The city had stopped fighting me. It was competing for me. REP 100.
I read it twice because the round number meant something the others never had. The system pays for verified craft, not reputation. But reputation, earned honestly, can't be forged, bought, or taken back. The worthless smith's name had crossed from shame to a mark the city wanted, one honest blade at a time.
Yan Wu stood at my shoulder,
And So-ah and Yuna, and I felt the weight of 3 women who'd crawled out of their graves to stand with me. We'd done it. The debt, the guild, the arms dealer, the crowned stare, and we were still standing. I didn't cheer. I stood in the room that had once thrown me out and believed it was over.
The city turned out the way a city turns out
For the end of a long winter. The market that had once whispered worthless now said the name out loud, the way people say a thing they're proud to have watched. The discards filled the lane by the hundreds, and the merchants who'd once refused me were at my door with orders.
Money crossed past 208,000 before the week was out,
climbing on every house, suddenly needing steel with my mark. More coin than I'd ever seen, and it should have felt like the whole point. It didn't. The money was the weather. The real thing was the vindication. 12 years of being told I was nothing.
I walked the market with the 3 women that day,
and the crowd parted for us, the way it parts for power. The old salvage women's kindness, the first copper pressed into my hand, the first blade that rang instead of chattering. It all led here, and it all held. I'd waited 12 years for that walk.
The 3 of them stood at S-Rank and beyond.
The truest thing in the whole victory. Yeonwoo, the sword saint whose arm had been shattered, drew her blade, and the edge sang the way my first true blade had sung a lifetime ago. And this time, the whole city heard it. No man in the yard could see the girl the sect threw away.
Seo-ah planted her great shield,
And the ground rang like a struck bell, and I watched the framed knight stand at the head of a line the city's champions couldn't break. And Yuna, my spent mage, soft, full-figured, violet-eyed, raised her staff and filled the dusk with light, and the tower's lie died in that light.
S-Rank and beyond. They stood in front of me, whole.
3 broken women the world discarded, and 1 worthless smith who'd refused to let them stay broken. I'd forged their weapons. They'd forged themselves, and me. You don't make people strong with steel. You make steel strong with people.
The so what came at dusk,
wearing Sir Aldrich's gray and carrying no smile. The guildmaster is finished, he said. The arms dealer is finished in this district. But a SSS forge at the center of a city that just learned your name is not a secret. It's a beacon. The kingdom is watching you, Smith.
I'd known it was coming, the way you know that tide is coming while you stand on the shore.
Every masterpiece shifts the balance of power. The system had told me in that first leaking room. One that ends a guild and breaks an arms dealer shifts a whole realm. The throne was the board I'd just been dragged onto.
Aldrich turned to go,
then paused at the threshold and looked back at the 3 women behind me, with the ghost of respect in it, the same respect he'd show a clean edge. You forged something the realm can't afford to lose, he said. That's not a victory, that's a debt, and the realm always collects. Then he was gone.
That night there was no war to plan
and no council to survive, and for the first time and longer than I could remember, the 4 of us simply sat. Yeonwoo flexed her dead fingers, and we watched a sword saint take back the last thing the sect tried to take. Seo-ah told a story that made Yuna laugh until she cried.
I looked around the room at them.
The sword saint with her arm coming back, the framed knight with her name clean, the spent mage with her spark bright, and I thought of the man who'd sat alone with 1 copper coin and a pile of rejected scrap, certain he'd die worthless and alone. He was wrong about all 3. This was the found family the Forge had built,
Worth more than every mark and rank the system ever ticked. The numbers would keep climbing, and more fights were coming I couldn't yet see. But none of that touched what was in that room. I'd started with a hammer and a debt. I'd ended with 3 women who'd die for me. I woke before dawn and went to the anvil alone, and let the old word sit in my chest one last time. Worthless. 12 years they'd called me that, and I'd spent every day since proving it a lie with my own hands. But somewhere along the way, the word had stopped being a wound. I'd made it mine.
Forge 174, Women 3, Rank SSS-9, Rep 100, Money plus $208,600. I read the numbers in the gray light, less a score than a ledger of everything the city had tried to take. The worthless blacksmith hadn't been destroyed by the guild. He'd destroyed its lie and built a family out of 3 broken women. Real work. The sun came up over the Forge district, and there was steel waiting that would need a smith.
I wasn't worthless, and I never had been. But I'd keep the name anyway, the way a man keeps a promise. The worthless blacksmith wasn't the man they'd thrown out 12 years ago. It was the man who'd stayed, and forged, and stood.